You've been told your whole life that control is the key. Control your future, control your career, control your relationships. But if control was really the answer, why do you still feel exhausted, anxious, and never at peace? Why, even when things go your way, does fear sneak back in, whispering that it could all fall apart tomorrow? Here's the truth no one told you. Control is an illusion, and the tighter you cling, the more life slips through your fingers like sand. But what if you didn't have to fight anymore? What if letting go didn't mean losing, but finally winning your freedom? For thousands of years, Buddhism has carried a quiet, powerful message. Peace is not found in controlling the universe, it's found in trusting it. The greatest masters, Zen monks, wandering sages, compassionate teachers discovered how to live with lightness, calm, and true freedom. They learned to let go of fear, to stop wrestling with life, and to flow with it instead. And tonight, as you hear these lessons, something inside you will shift. The storm in your mind will begin to settle. The weight of what if will start to lift. You'll feel the freedom of not needing all the answers, of knowing that the universe itself is holding you. This isn't just philosophy, it's transformation. By the end, you'll feel less like you're pushing against life, and more like you're being carried by it, gently, effortlessly, like a river. Are you ready to release control? Are you ready to finally trust the universe? Let's begin. You've just opened the door to something very few people ever dare to face. The possibility that the peace you've been searching for is not in holding tighter, but in loosening your grip. There's a quiet strength hidden in surrender, a kind of wisdom that whispers to those who pay attention. And if you allow yourself to step into it, what unfolds is not weakness, not passivity, but freedom. This is where we begin the subtle art of non-interference. Most of us are taught from an early age that life must be managed, controlled, and bent into shape by sheer effort. We measure success by how much we can dominate outcomes, how precisely we can force reality to obey our expectations. And yet, no matter how carefully we plan, the universe has its own rhythm. There's traffic when you least expect it, storms when you planned a sunny day, endings when you were sure something would last forever. Interference, our constant attempt to force life into our mold, becomes not only exhausting, but a barrier to seeing what is already unfolding. Non-interference does not mean indifference. It does not mean neglect. It means learning the delicate art of knowing when action is wise and when action is only an expression of fear. It means allowing conditions, causes, and timing to move in their own way, without us clawing at them with desperation. This is the teaching the Buddha called letting things arise and pass away in their own time. It's not laziness, it's trust. It's understanding that just as you cannot open a flower by pulling on its petals, you cannot rush life into bloom by meddling. The difficulty lies in the mind's addiction to control. The ego thrives on the illusion that it is the master conductor of all events. When things go wrong, it blames itself or others. When things go right, it takes the credit. But look deeper. Every outcome you've ever experienced has come from countless conditions outside your reach. Your birth, the weather, the economy, the mood of another person, the hidden chain of choices stretching back centuries. Non-interference is not a withdrawal from responsibility, but a profound recognition of interdependence. Think of water. It does not argue with rocks, yet over time it shapes canyons. It does not resist gravity, yet it finds its way to the ocean. Non-interference is living with that same quiet persistence. It is choosing not to obstruct what is flowing, not to manipulate what is naturally arranging itself, but to act in harmony with conditions. When you stop meddling, you discover that much of life works perfectly well without your constant management. The heart beats, the breath rises and falls, the seasons turn. Peace begins where interference ends. At its core, interference arises from fear. Fear that if we don't push, things won't happen, or worse, they will happen in ways that hurt us. But notice the paradox. The more we interfere, the more tangled things become. Have you ever tried to solve a problem in a rush, only to create 3 new problems? That's interference. Have you ever insisted on controlling a loved one's choices, only to drive them further away? That's interference. When you release it, you allow natural intelligence to surface, the intelligence of causes and conditions working together far beyond your limited view. In Buddhist practice, non-interference is cultivated through mindfulness. To watch the mind wanting to jump in, to fix, to grasp, and instead to let the urge dissolve, that is training in freedom. In daily life, this looks like pausing before reacting, breathing before deciding, listening instead of interrupting. Non-interference is not the absence of action, but the presence of awareness that sees clearly when action is needed and when restraint is wiser. The Buddha described this as skillful, means the ability to respond appropriately rather than compulsively. Consider a farmer. He tills the soil, plants the seed, waters the field. He does his part, but he cannot force the seed to sprout. He cannot drag the sun across the sky. If he meddles, digging up the soil every day to check on the seed, he destroys what he wanted to grow. His wisdom lies in non-interference, knowing when he has done enough, when nature must take its course. Life is no different. We can prepare, cultivate, and act with care, but there comes a point where we must step back. The harvest belongs to the unfolding of conditions, not to our restless hands. Non-interference also reveals itself in relationships. How often do we interfere in the lives of those we love, convinced we know what is best for them? Parents dictate their children's choices long after they've grown. Friends try to fix problems that were never theirs to fix. Lovers attempt to mold each other into images of perfection. Yet the more we interfere, the more we suffocate. To love deeply is to allow space. To support is to trust that others have their own path. Non-interference here means respecting freedom, believing that the wisdom of another person's journey will guide them better than our fears ever could. In meditation, this lesson becomes even clearer. The beginner tries to interfere with the mind, forcing it to be still, demanding it to be silent. But the more you struggle, the noisier it becomes. The advanced practitioner learns the subtle art of simply observing. Thoughts arise, thoughts fade, sensations come and go. No interference is needed, because awareness itself is enough. In this way, meditation is a training ground for life, the practice of letting things be as they are, without grasping or pushing them away. There is a freedom that emerges only when you stop insisting that life obey your timetable. Imagine the relief of waking up without needing to control how the day unfolds. You still act, you still choose, but you no longer chain yourself to outcomes. This creates a profound shift. Effort becomes lighter, relationships become more honest, and challenges become less threatening. Non-interference opens the doorway to trust, not blind trust, but the deep confidence that life has an intelligence greater than your plans. What happens when you live this way? Anxiety softens, decisions become clearer. You notice small miracles that control once blinded you to the way help arrives unexpectedly, the way problems dissolve without your forcing, the way opportunities appear when you stop chasing. Non-interference creates space for the universe to breathe through you, and in that space, peace arises. It takes courage to stop interfering. The mind will tell you it's reckless, that things will collapse without your grip. But when you dare to let go, you realize life has always been holding you. Non-interference is not retreat, it is strength in its purest form. It is choosing to align with reality rather than struggle against it. The Buddha's words echo through this truth. Let go, and you will know freedom. When you begin practicing this, start small. Notice the urge to correct, to argue, to force your will. Pause instead. Let silence speak. Allow time to pass before reacting. Little by little, you train yourself to step back, to witness the intelligence of unfolding events. Over time, this becomes natural. You find yourself less entangled, less burdened, more at ease. The subtle art of non-interference is not a single act, but a lifelong practice, one that deepens every day. When you begin to release the urge to interfere, a deeper truth quietly rises to the surface. The very reason interference feels so urgent is because we fear change. We try to control because we dread loss, because we resist the shifting ground beneath our feet. Yet in the heart of Buddhist teaching there is a radical message. Change is not your enemy. It is the very essence of freedom. To see impermanence not as a thief, but as a guide, is to transform your entire relationship with life. Impermanence is often misunderstood as something tragic, a reminder that all things will eventually slip away. But this is only half the truth. The other half is luminous. Because everything changes, nothing is fixed forever. Suffering passes, pain softens, failure opens into new beginnings. Without impermanence, growth would be impossible, healing would never come, joy would never arise after sorrow. To embrace impermanence is to recognize that every moment carries the seed of renewal. When you look at the seasons, you can see this clearly. The tree that loses its leaves in autumn does not despair. It does not cling to the old growth, trying to glue each leaf back in place. It stands bare through winter, trusting that spring will bring new life. If the tree fought to keep its leaves, it would never flower again. You are not so different. Holding on to what has already lived its life only prevents you from experiencing what is waiting to bloom next. In relationships, impermanence reveals its most tender lesson. Friendships evolve, children grow, lovers change. The instinct is to grasp at what once was, to try to preserve a moment of closeness, of youth, of shared intimacy. Yet when you soften into the truth of change, you begin to see love itself differently. It becomes less about possession and more about appreciation. To love someone with the awareness of impermanence is to treasure them fully while they are present, without clinging when the form of that relationship shifts. This kind of love is deeper because it is not chained to permanence. It flows with reality rather than against it. In your own inner life, impermanence works like a medicine. Every state of mind you experience, no matter how heavy, is subject to change. Anger flares but cannot hold forever. Anxiety may grip you, but it cannot stay. Even grief, which feels eternal in its darkest hours, eventually moves, softening into something bearable, sometimes even into compassion. Knowing this is liberation. You stop believing that today's emotions define you. You see them as passing weather in the sky of your mind. The Buddha taught that clinging is the root of suffering, and clinging is nothing more than the refusal to accept impermanence. We cling to youth, to possessions, to identities, to ideas of how life should be, and when change arrives, as it always does, we suffer. But when you turn toward impermanence and say yes, a strange thing happens. Suffering loosens its grip. You discover that the very thing you feared change is also what makes life precious. If everything lasted forever, nothing would matter. It is because the flower wilts that its beauty pierces the heart. It is because the child grows that each moment of play carries meaning. Impermanence does not steal. It gives urgency to love, depth to joy, and softness to sorrow. This perspective also transforms how you approach goals and ambitions. Many people hesitate to take risks because they fear failure. But impermanence reminds you that failure itself is not final. The job you lost, the dream that dissolved, the plan that collapsed, none of these mark the end. They are simply forms that arose and passed, clearing space for new possibilities. When you accept impermanence, You move with courage because you know nothing defines you permanently. You are always capable of renewal. Impermanence also liberates you from regret. We replay the past, wishing events had unfolded differently. But the truth is, the past itself is impermanent. It exists only in memory, shifting and fading with time. What remains is the present moment, fresh and alive. When you release the illusion that you could preserve or rewrite the past, you discover freedom in what is here now. You learn to carry the lessons, but let the weight dissolve. There is also freedom in recognizing the impermanence of identity. You are not a fixed self carved in stone. You are fluid, a constantly changing process of thoughts, experiences, choices, and influences. Who you were 5 years ago is not who you are today, and who you are today will not be who you are tomorrow. To cling to an old identity is to live in a cage that no longer fits. To accept impermanence in yourself is to allow growth, to permit reinvention, to welcome the possibility of becoming more than you once imagined. Even your body teaches impermanence every day. Cells die and regenerate, hair turns grey, muscles weaken, then strengthen, then weaken again. To resist this is to suffer endlessly, clinging to youth or health as if they were permanent. But to accept it is to live with gratitude. Instead of mourning every wrinkle, you can honor the years that gave it. Instead of fearing decline, you can celebrate the body's resilience and adapt gracefully to its changes. This acceptance does not make you passive, it makes you free to care for your body with love, not fear. Impermanence also transforms your relationship with death. The ultimate change, the one most people avoid thinking about, is the doorway Buddhism points to again and again. Death is not the destruction of life, but the continuation of impermanence. Every breath is a reminder, inhale arises, exhale passes. In the same way, life arises, life passes. When you live with this awareness, fear begins to soften. You cherish time more deeply. You speak the words you mean. You stop postponing joy for some imagined future. The knowledge of death makes life luminous. To see impermanence as liberation is also to discover compassion. When you understand that everyone is subject to change, you become gentler. The person who hurt you is not fixed in that act. They too are changing, growing, stumbling, learning. The suffering they caused may pass, just as your own anger may pass. This perspective allows forgiveness to emerge naturally, not as a forced act, but as a recognition of the fluid nature of being human. In daily practice, you can cultivate awareness of impermanence in simple ways. Notice the steam rising from your tea, dissolving into air. Watch clouds drift and scatter across the sky. Pay attention to the way sound arises and vanishes, leaving silence behind. These are not trivial observations. They are training the mind to accept the fleeting nature of all things. And the more you see it, the more natural it becomes to let go when life asks you to release. Impermanence also teaches resilience. When you know that no state lasts forever, you stop collapsing under the weight of difficulty. Hardship becomes a visitor, not a permanent resident. Joy becomes a guest to welcome fully, knowing it too will leave. This rhythm does not diminish happiness, it intensifies it. You savor what is here because you know it is temporary, and that awareness turns ordinary moments into treasures. When you embrace impermanence fully, you begin to see the futility of resistance. So much of human pain comes from trying to hold back the tide, to freeze moments, to fight the flow of life. But the tide does not ask your permission. It comes, it goes. To stand rigid against it is to be broken. To flow with it is to be carried. Non-interference and impermanence are two sides of the same truth. The universe moves, and peace comes when you allow yourself to move with it. This is not a philosophy meant only for monks or sages. It is a practical doorway to freedom, for anyone willing to see clearly. Each time you practice letting go, each time you accept change without clinging, you strengthen your capacity to live lightly. And in living lightly, you discover a joy that no permanence could ever give. The fear of impermanence turns into reverence when you realize it is the reason anything matters at all. To fear change is to miss the beauty of the fleeting. To embrace it is to finally live. This is the liberation the Buddha pointed to, a life unburdened by clinging, open to the endless dance of arising and passing, full of gratitude for each precious breath. When the truth of impermanence begins to settle in your heart, another question naturally arises: if everything is changing, if nothing is fixed, then how should you live? Should you simply drift wherever life takes you, or should you push with all your strength to shape the future? The Buddha's answer was neither extreme. He offered something more subtle, a way of effort that is neither rigid nor careless, a balance between discipline and surrender. This is the middle way of effort, a path that allows you to act with clarity and energy without becoming trapped in strain or passivity. Most of us live swinging between two extremes. On one side, there is forcing, the endless pressure to strive, achieve, and control every outcome. On the other side, there is neglect, the temptation to give up, to abandon responsibility, to let laziness rule. Both lead to suffering. Forcing drains your spirit, leaves you anxious, and ties your worth to results. Neglect leaves you stagnant, dissatisfied, and weak. The middle way is neither of these. It is a rhythm of action that feels alive but not tense, purposeful but not desperate, steady but not rigid. In Buddhist teaching, this balance is compared to tuning the strings of a lute. If the string is pulled too tight, it snaps. If it is left too loose, it makes no sound. Only when the tension is balanced does music arise. Your effort is the same. Too much strain breaks you, too little care dulls you. But the middle tension, the balanced effort, produces harmony in life. To live this way requires sensitivity, the ability to listen to yourself deeply, to know when to lean forward and when to step back. Effort in the Buddhist sense is not about raw intensity, but about skill. It is called right effort, the kind of energy that supports clarity and compassion rather than ego and greed. This means cultivating what nourishes the mind and letting go of what drags it down. It is not simply about working hard, but about working wisely. The middle way of effort asks you to be mindful of the quality of your actions, to see whether they are guided by fear, by pride, by craving, or whether they come from steadiness and kindness. Discipline plays an important role, but discipline here is not about harshness or punishment. It is about consistency, the quiet commitment to what matters most. Discipline without forcing is like tending a fire. You feed it regularly with care, not with panic. You do not smother it with too much wood, nor do you neglect it until it dies. You keep it alive with patience, letting it grow in its own pace. This kind of discipline does not chain you, it frees you. It gives shape to your days without crushing your spirit. Surrender is the other half of the balance. Surrender here is not about giving up. It is about letting go of the illusion that you control all results. You act with effort, but you release the need to dictate the outcome. This protects you from despair when things don't unfold as planned, and it shields you from arrogance when they do. Surrender means you plant the seed, water the soil, but you do not demand the flower to bloom by your schedule. You trust the process, knowing that effort and conditions together give rise to fruit. This balance shows itself clearly in meditation. A beginner often tries too hard, straining to focus, fighting against thoughts. The mind becomes tight, restless, and discouraged. Others fall into the opposite trap, drifting into daydreams, making no effort to stay present. Both extremes are unhelpful. The middle way in meditation is alert but relaxed, focused yet open. You sit upright with dignity, but you soften your grip. Attention is steady but gentle, like holding a bird in your hands, not so tight that you crush it, not so loose that it flies away. In daily life, this balance of effort prevents burnout. Many people throw themselves into work or personal goals with relentless intensity, only to collapse from exhaustion or emptiness. Others avoid effort, waiting for life to deliver meaning without contribution, and end up feeling directionless. The middle way allows you to engage fully while also resting fully. You give your best in each task, but when the task is complete, you release it. You learn the wisdom of cycles, work and rest, activity and stillness, effort and ease. This balanced effort also reshapes your relationship with ambition. You can still pursue goals, but you no longer chain your worth to them. You set intentions, you move toward them with steady steps, but you do not crush yourself with pressure or self-criticism along the way. Ambition becomes a path of growth rather than a prison of perfectionism. Success is not measured only by the outcome, but by the quality of the effort itself, whether it was honest, compassionate, and balanced. The middle way of effort also teaches patience. Forcing is rooted in impatience, the need for immediate results. Neglect is rooted in hopelessness, the belief that nothing is worth trying. Balanced effort trusts the long arc of change. It knows that progress often unfolds slowly, like water carving stone. It values steady practice over dramatic bursts. It sees each small step as meaningful, each day of honest effort as a victory, regardless of how visible the results may be. In relationships, balanced effort shows up as presence. Forcing in relationships looks like trying to control others, demanding affection, or clinging to unrealistic expectations. Neglect looks like indifference, withdrawal, or lack of care. The middle way is attentive, without suffocating, loving, without trying to own. It is the effort of listening deeply, of showing up consistently, of giving space when needed. This effort creates trust and allows love to grow naturally rather than through pressure. On the path of spiritual practice, balanced effort protects you from discouragement. There will be days when your mind feels dull, when meditation seems impossible, when compassion feels far away. Forcing yourself with harsh judgment only deepens frustration. Neglecting the practice leaves you drifting in confusion. Balanced effort is the quiet voice that says, "Keep going, gently." It is the willingness to return again and again without anger at yourself, without resignation, but with steady faith that each return matters. This way of effort also reveals something profound about freedom. Many believe freedom means the absence of effort, but Buddhism teaches that true freedom is found in right effort. When your actions are aligned with wisdom and compassion, when they are free from forcing and neglect, effort itself becomes joyful. It no longer feels like struggle but like flow. Your energy becomes an expression of your deepest values, and each act strengthens rather than drains you. Balance also brings clarity in decision-making. Forcing decisions leads to haste and regret. Neglecting decisions leaves you stuck in avoidance. Balanced effort listens carefully, considers wisely, and then acts with confidence, accepting whatever comes. This way of deciding honors both reason and intuition, both responsibility and surrender. It allows you to live with fewer regrets because your choices are grounded in presence, not in panic or apathy. In the body, you can also sense the wisdom of balanced effort. Overexertion leads to injury, exhaustion, or illness. Underuse leads to weakness and decay. The middle path in physical effort is steady care movement, nourishment, rest, all balanced. You train strength without punishing yourself. You honor limits without letting comfort become a cage. This harmony between effort and ease creates vitality that lasts rather than peaks that collapse. Balanced effort even shapes how you respond to challenges. Forcing tries to crush obstacles with aggression. Neglect avoids them altogether. The middle way engages challenges with resilience, meeting them directly, using creativity and patience, but without the desperation to control every detail. This approach often reveals solutions that forcing would miss and strength that neglect would never discover. Ultimately, the middle way of effort is a practice of trust. Trust in yourself, that you can give your best without breaking yourself. Trust in life, that your steady actions will bear fruit in their own time. Trust in the path, that balance leads to wisdom. This trust allows you to walk with dignity through change and uncertainty, knowing that each step matters, not because it guarantees a specific outcome, but because it aligns you with truth. To live in this way is to feel a new kind of strength, calm, steady, unshakable. You act with purpose but without strain. You rest without guilt. You move forward without fear. Discipline and surrender no longer feel like opposites but like partners in a dance, each completing the other. This is the art of effort that does not wound but heals, that does not enslave but liberates, that does not cling but flows. And from this balance, the journey into patience, karma, and the deeper unfolding of trust continues naturally. When balance in effort becomes part of you, another challenge quietly reveals itself. You may give your best with calm steadiness, but a voice in the mind still whispers, "When will the results appear? Why haven't things turned out yet?" This restless need for outcomes is one of the deepest knots we carry. The Buddha pointed to a truth that cuts through this struggle: plant the seed, but do not claim ownership of the harvest. Patience with karma is not passive waiting. It is a form of wisdom that frees you from chains of expectation and disappointment. Karma is not a cosmic punishment system, nor is it a guarantee of reward. It is the natural unfolding of causes and conditions, the law of seed and fruit. Every action you take plants something in the soil of existence. Sometimes the fruit comes quickly, sometimes it ripens after years, and sometimes it appears in ways you never expected. To demand that results show up on your timeline is like standing in a field shouting at sprouts to break through the earth. The seed does not obey impatience. It follows its nature, and your role is to nurture, not to control. This patience requires trust, and trust grows through understanding. Think of the smallest act of kindness, a smile to a stranger, a word of comfort, a moment of generosity. You may never know how far that ripple travels. Perhaps the stranger carries that warmth into their day, treating another with kindness, who then passes it forward again. The chain of effects spreads far beyond what your eyes can trace. To insist on measuring it, to demand immediate confirmation, is to miss the vastness of interconnection. Karmic patience allows you to act without needing proof, because you trust the invisible web of causes to carry your action forward. The absence of patience turns life into frustration. You donate but expect praise. You help but expect gratitude. You work but demand recognition. When these expectations are not met, bitterness arises, and the joy of the act is poisoned. Karmic patience teaches that the value lies in the act itself, not in the applause or reward. When you release ownership of the harvest, generosity becomes light, service becomes joyful, and work becomes fulfilling, regardless of outcome. The act itself completes itself in that moment, and this freedom is profound. There is also a lesson here about time. Karma does not follow your calendar. Conditions ripen when they are ready, not when you want them to. Sometimes you plant in spring and see fruit in summer. Sometimes the tree takes years before it offers shade. Your task is to tend the soil, water the roots, and protect the growth without demanding speed. In this way, patience is not idle. It is active care without obsession. It is the strength to keep planting even when the field looks bare, because you know life is always moving beneath the surface. Karmic patience also protects you from despair in hardship. When life feels heavy, the mind often cries, "Why me?" But when you see through the lens of karma, you understand that every moment is the flowering of many seeds, some you planted, some planted by others, some planted by countless causes, stretching beyond comprehension. This perspective does not blame, but it empowers. It shows you that each choice now is another seed, another direction for the future. Even in suffering, you are planting. Patience allows you to endure the winter, knowing that spring will come, that nothing stays frozen forever. One of the most liberating insights is that you are not the sole owner of results. When a good outcome arrives, it is never just your seed, it is the rain, the sunlight, the soil, the unseen hands that contributed. This recognition softens pride and deepens gratitude. When a difficult outcome arrives, it is also not solely your burden. It is the collision of countless conditions, many beyond your control. This recognition softens guilt and releases you from endless self-blame. Patience with karma allows you to hold both success and failure lightly, knowing neither is fully yours to possess. In relationships, karmic patience transforms how you give love and care. Without patience, love becomes transactional. If I give, I expect return. With patience, love becomes unconditional. You give attention, kindness, and support not to extract something, but because it is beautiful to give. Sometimes that love will blossom quickly, sometimes it may take years, and sometimes it may not return in the way you hoped. But patience frees you from resentment. It allows you to see the simple truth. Love given is never wasted, because it shapes you in the very act of giving. Patience also deepens humility. You may think you know the best outcome, but karma unfolds with complexity far beyond your mind's planning. Many times what you thought was a setback revealed itself later as the perfect condition for growth. The job you lost made space for a deeper calling. The relationship that ended created the freedom to know yourself. The delay that frustrated you saved you from a worse path. With patience, you stop rushing to label events as good or bad, success or failure. You learn to wait, to watch, to trust that the meaning of a seed is not always visible at the moment of planting. This kind of patience requires courage because it strips away the comfort of control. It asks you to give your best and then step back into uncertainty. But that very uncertainty is what gives life its richness. If you always knew when and how results would appear, life would lose its mystery. Karmic patience teaches you to embrace the unknown, to rest in the unfolding, to see beauty not only in the harvest, but in the waiting itself. There is also a deep connection between karmic patience and compassion for yourself. Many people plant seeds of effort and then punish themselves for not seeing results quickly. They turn practice into self-criticism, growth into judgment. But patience reminds you that growth has its own pace. Just as you would not scold a child for not becoming an adult overnight, you need not scold yourself for not reaching perfection instantly. Patience allows you to nurture yourself as you would a garden with care, persistence, and gentleness. Daily practice of karmic patience can be as simple as noticing where you cling to results. When you do a good deed, observe the mind asking for acknowledgement. When you put effort into a task, observe the impatience rising. Instead of feeding it, smile at it. Remind yourself, the seed is planted. My work is complete in this moment. The rest belongs to life. Over time, this shift becomes natural, and your actions grow lighter, free from the burden of demand. Even the smallest habits change under this perspective. A single breath taken with awareness is a seed. A moment of restraint instead of anger is a seed. A kind thought toward yourself is a seed. You may not see their fruit today, but trust that they accumulate, shaping your future like unseen roots, strengthening a tree. Karmic patience is faith in the invisible, the willingness to keep planting goodness without rushing to harvest. This way of living changes how you see others as well. You no longer rush to judge someone's present state because you know they too are in the middle of a field of growth. Someone lost in anger may be planting seeds of future wisdom without even knowing it. Someone in despair may be closer to transformation than it appears. Patience allows you to honor everyone's journey without demanding they ripen by your schedule. The greatest gift of karmic patience is freedom. When you no longer tie your joy to the timing of results, you are free to act from love, from integrity, from truth. Your peace is not postponed until the harvest. It is alive in the planting itself. You find meaning not only in what comes later but in the act of giving now. This makes your life steady, resilient, and full, because your happiness no longer depends on controlling outcomes. Through karmic patience, you learn that life is not a bargain, but a flow. You contribute, you nurture, you trust. The universe weaves your actions into patterns you may never see, but they matter. Each seed planted in sincerity shapes the future, whether or not you stand in the field when the fruit appears. To live this way is to walk with open hands, to give without clinging, to serve without waiting for applause. This is the patience that liberates, the patience that turns every moment of effort into an offering to the vast unfolding of life. When patience with karma begins to soften your grasp on results, life itself starts showing you patterns you cannot ignore. Again and again the same lessons appear: struggles, losses, frustrations, disappointments. At first these repetitions feel like punishments, like being trapped in a cycle with no escape. But the Buddha offered a radical shift. What if these cycles were not enemies but teachers? What if the endless turning of samsara, the wheel of birth and death, joy and sorrow, success and failure, was itself the classroom where freedom is learned? Samsara is the restless current of existence, the continual arising and fading of experiences. It is the hunger that drives desire, the dissatisfaction that follows every pleasure, the suffering that clings to loss. Many traditions describe samsara as something to be fought against, but in Buddhism it is understood as a mirror. Every repetition is a reminder that clinging leads to suffering. Every cycle is a chance to wake up, to see clearly, to release control. Rather than fleeing from samsara, the path is to learn from it. Frustration is one of the clearest teachers. Each time you crave something and do not receive it, or receive it and then lose it, the sting points to the truth. Nothing here can be fully held. The cycle repeats because we resist the lesson. When frustration arises, patience and awareness reveal its message that control is not possible, that clinging only deepens the wound. When you learn to sit with frustration without demanding it vanish, it begins to soften. It shows you where your expectations are rigid, where your attachments keep you bound. Suffering itself is a teacher that does not lie. Pleasure can deceive, making you believe permanence is possible, but pain strips away illusions. When you lose someone, when a dream fails, when health falters, the raw truth of impermanence stands before you. It hurts, yet it teaches. It reveals that freedom cannot be found in securing outcomes, only in letting go. When you see this, suffering becomes not an enemy to destroy, but a guide pointing you toward release. Cycles of repetition in life, the same mistakes, the same arguments, the same disappointments, are samsara's most relentless lessons. At first, they feel like curses. Why does this keep happening? Why do I meet the same patterns in different forms? The Buddhist answer is simple: because the lesson has not yet been learned. Each repetition is life patiently pointing to the same route, saying, look here, release here, until the clinging is seen and let go. Samsara repeats. When you finally release the grasp, the cycle dissolves, and the teacher has completed its work. Even joy in samsara carries a teaching. The sweetness of a happy moment, the rush of success, the comfort of love, these too are impermanent. They rise, they pass. When clung to, they create suffering in their loss. When accepted as fleeting, they open the heart to gratitude. Samsara teaches that even joy is not to be possessed, but to be cherished and released. In this way, happiness itself becomes a lesson in letting go, reminding you that clinging even to beauty binds you. This perspective transforms the meaning of failure. Most see failure as an enemy, as proof of weakness, but within the cycles of samsara, failure is often the sharper teacher. Success can breed pride, blindness, and attachment. Failure exposes the fragility of control, humbles the ego, and reveals the futility of rigid grasping. Through failure, you learn resilience, compassion, and humility. Samsara teaches not by offering only sweetness, but by exposing the bitter truths that make freedom possible. The wheel of samsara turns not only in lifetimes but in single days. Moods rise and fall, thoughts appear and vanish, desires spark and fade. Every small cycle reflects the larger truth. By paying attention to these microcycles, you train yourself to see the pattern everywhere. A morning irritation passes, an afternoon joy fades, an evening worry dissolves. Each cycle whispers, "Nothing lasts, let go." To ignore these whispers is to remain enslaved. To hear them is to learn. Samsara also teaches through relationships. The same conflicts return, the same wounds are triggered, the same disappointments replay. These are not punishments from the outside. They are mirrors showing what clinging still lives inside. A partner's anger, a friend's neglect, a colleague's betrayal, each reveals attachments and expectations that bind you. The cycle repeats until awareness grows. When you respond, not with control but with release, samsara has delivered its lesson. There is great compassion in seeing samsara as teacher. Instead of cursing suffering, you bow to it as the messenger that awakens you. Instead of resenting life's cycles, you see them as opportunities for insight. This shift does not erase pain, but it gives it purpose. Pain becomes the voice of wisdom, guiding you away from illusions. With this view, even the darkest moments become part of the path, because they strip away what cannot last and reveal what is real. Samsara also shows the cost of clinging to identity. Each time you insist, "I am this, I must be this," life shifts and shatters that identity. You lose a role, a job, a status, and suffering rushes in. Samsara repeats this until the truth becomes clear: you are not a fixed self. The cycle of birth and death applies not only to bodies, but to identities. To hold tightly is to suffer endlessly. To release is to find freedom beyond roles. The teacher here is relentless, but precise. Identity is impermanent. Do not chain yourself to it. The cycles of craving and dissatisfaction also reveal the limits of desire. You want, you chase, you achieve, you tire, you want again. The wheel spins endlessly. At first this feels like failure. Why does satisfaction never last? But the lesson is not that you are broken. The lesson is that desire by nature cannot bring lasting peace. Samsara teaches this by repeating the cycle until you see clearly. The end of craving is not in achieving everything, but in recognizing that the cycle itself cannot satisfy. Patience with samsara as teacher allows you to live with more compassion for others. When you see someone caught in the same cycle again and again, you no longer only judge. You recognize the wheel they are on, the lesson still unfolding. Instead of anger, you feel empathy. You know that wisdom ripens at its own pace, that cycles cannot be rushed. This recognition deepens compassion, because you see that everyone, like you, is a student of samsara, stumbling toward release. Even death, the greatest turn of the wheel, carries teaching. To see death not as enemy but as teacher is to see it as the final reminder that control is impossible, that clinging is futile. Death teaches urgency, not to delay love, not to postpone awakening, not to waste this breath. It teaches humility, not to believe you own life, not to act as though permanence were yours. To live with awareness of death is to let samsara itself push you toward freedom. Samsara as teacher is not cruel. It is simply honest. It reflects the consequences of clinging again and again until the truth cannot be denied. When you resist, the wheel feels merciless. When you listen, the wheel becomes guidance. The repetition of suffering is not punishment, it is instruction. The question is not whether samsara will turn, but whether you will learn. When you shift to this view, frustration loses some of its sting. You begin to thank life for showing you what still binds you. Each repetition becomes an invitation. Will you cling again, or will you release? Each cycle becomes a chance to step closer to freedom. Samsara does not need to be feared or hated. It needs to be understood, because within its endless turning lies the key to stepping beyond it. And so the very wheel that once imprisoned you becomes the wheel that teaches you. Every rise and fall, every joy and sorrow, every gain and loss, all of it pointing in one direction: let go. This is how samsara, once seen as an enemy, reveals itself as the greatest teacher, one that never gives up until the lesson is complete. When you begin to see samsara not as punishment but as a teacher, another door quietly opens. The cycles of gain and loss, joy and pain, rise and fall, they all point beyond themselves toward something deeper. The lesson they keep repeating is that clinging to certainty is the root of unrest. Beneath all our striving, all our questions, all our control, there is a hunger to know, to secure, to fix reality into something solid. But Buddhism whispers a different truth. The deepest confidence is not in what you can hold, but in what you cannot grasp. This is the Zen of emptiness, the quiet strength of trusting what cannot be pinned down. Emptiness is one of the most misunderstood teachings. To many, it sounds bleak, like a void where nothing matters. But emptiness in Buddhism is not nothingness. It is the recognition that nothing exists in isolation, nothing stands alone, nothing has a fixed essence. Everything arises through causes and conditions, endlessly shifting, endlessly interwoven. To see this is to realize that the solidity we cling to was never there. And while this might seem frightening at first, it is actually the greatest relief, because if nothing is fixed, everything is possible. The human mind craves certainty. We want guarantees of success, assurances of love, promises of safety. Yet life refuses to give them. Every attempt to force certainty collapses into frustration. The Zen of emptiness invites you to step into the space of not knowing, to rest in the openness where certainty was never needed. This is not passive resignation, it is trust in the living mystery of existence. It is learning to find confidence not in rigid answers, but in the very groundlessness of life. When you trust emptiness, you begin to see that the need for certainty was a cage. The demand for fixed answers keeps you trapped in anxiety, because no answer ever lasts. You solve one problem, another arises. You settle one doubt, another appears. The mind never rests because it is looking for permanence in a world that is fluid. Emptiness teaches you to release the demand for final answers and instead live fully in the unfolding moment. In this way, peace does not come from knowing, but from letting go of the need to know. This is why Zen masters often taught through paradox. When asked for certainty, they offered riddles instead. When students sought solid ground, They were given koans that broke the logic of the mind. The point was never to confuse, but to free. By breaking the craving for graspable answers, the teacher pointed the student toward direct experience, the raw immediacy of life as it island. In that space, the mind learns to rest in openness, to trust the silence beyond concepts. Emptiness also dissolves the burden of identity. If the self is not fixed, if it too is empty of solid essence, then you are not trapped in who you think you must be. The labels you wear, the stories you repeat, the roles you cling to, they are all shifting, interdependent, impermanent. Trusting emptiness means trusting that you can let these labels go without losing yourself. In fact, by letting them go, you discover a freedom greater than any identity could offer. You are not a single story, you are a living process, open to transformation. This teaching is not abstract, it touches every aspect of life. Consider relationships. Much of the suffering in love comes from demanding certainty, wanting guarantees of permanence, needing promises of unchanging affection. But when you trust emptiness, love becomes freer. You no longer grasp to lock it in place, you meet it as it arises. Each moment of connection is treasured for what it is, not clung to as something that must last forever. This makes love more alive, not less. It is no longer about ownership, but about presence. Work and ambition, too, are softened by this view. The demand for certainty in outcomes often leads to burnout and despair. When you rest in emptiness, you act with dedication, but without the desperate need for guarantees. You put forth effort, but you trust the openness of conditions. Success or failure no longer define you because both are empty of fixed meaning. They arise, they pass, they teach, and they dissolve. Confidence grows not from controlling outcomes, but from knowing you can meet whatever arises with openness. Even fear itself begins to change under the lens of emptiness. Fear thrives on the unknown, but when you learn to rest in not knowing, fear loses its grip. You no longer fight uncertainty, you lean into it. The unknown becomes a place of possibility rather than threat. Each moment unfolds fresh, unbound by past definitions. In this way, emptiness turns the space of anxiety into the space of freedom. Meditation practice becomes the direct training ground for this trust. When thoughts arise, you see they are empty, they appear, they fade, they cannot be grasped. When sensations shift, you see they too are empty of permanence. Even the sense of I is seen as a collection of changing processes. Each time you notice this, you rest a little more deeply in the openness beneath it all. Over time, the habit of clinging weakens, and trust in emptiness grows natural. This trust also transforms how you meet suffering. Pain still arises, but you no longer chain it to a fixed identity. Instead of saying, "I am suffering," you see suffering as a passing process, empty of permanence. This space allows compassion to grow. You suffer less because you no longer build a self around the pain. You meet it, you learn from it, and you let it move. Emptiness turns even suffering into an expression of freedom. The Zen of emptiness is also the Zen of presence. When you stop demanding certainty, you return to what is here. Breathing, hearing, seeing, touching life in its raw immediacy. You begin to notice that this moment is always enough. Certainty about tomorrow is no longer needed when the richness of now is fully alive. This is why Zen emphasizes simplicity, sitting, walking, eating, breathing. Each act is complete in itself when met with openness. The courage to trust emptiness also reshapes your view of death. If the self is not a fixed essence, then death is not the annihilation of something solid, but the continuation of change. The body returns to earth, the breath dissolves into air, the mind's processes end their cycle. Death is the ultimate expression of emptiness, the release of all clinging. To trust this is to live without fear, to see death not as a void, but as part of the endless openness of existence. Living with trust in emptiness does not mean abandoning responsibility. It means acting from clarity rather than clinging. You still care, you still engage, but your care is lighter, your engagement freer. You give fully without demanding permanence. You love deeply without needing guarantees. You work with dedication without tying your worth to outcomes. This way of living is not careless, it is fearless. The Zen of emptiness invites you into a confidence that cannot be broken, because it does not depend on what can be held. It is the confidence of standing in openness, of meeting life without needing to trap it in concepts. This confidence is not loud or boastful. It is quiet, steady, unshakable. It grows not from having answers, but from being free from the demand for answers. When emptiness is trusted, life itself becomes lighter. The weight of needing everything to make sense dissolves. The pressure of demanding guarantees fades. You learn to walk without burden, to breathe without fear, to live without clinging. The space of not knowing, once feared, becomes the ground of freedom. And from that ground, compassion, wisdom, and joy naturally arise. When the insight of emptiness settles into the heart, a natural question arises. If nothing exists on its own, if everything is open and ungraspable, then how does life keep unfolding? Why do events arise the way they do? The Buddha gave a profound answer. Nothing happens by chance, and nothing happens by one person's control. Everything arises through dependent origination, a vast web of causes and conditions so intricate that no single mind could ever hold it. To see this truth is to be released from the exhausting illusion that you are the master of all outcomes. Dependent origination is not an abstract concept. It is the very texture of your daily life. Every word you speak is shaped by your upbringing, by the language taught to you, by the people you have met, by the moods you carry in that moment. Even a simple gesture like drinking water depends on countless conditions: the rain that filled the river, the workers who built the pipes, the energy that pumps it to your home, the evolution of life that gave you a body needing hydration. When you pause to see this, the ordinary becomes extraordinary. Every act is the flowering of countless invisible roots. The illusion of control grows because the mind narrows its vision. It sees only the small space of personal effort and forgets the wider web. You believe you control success because you worked hard, forgetting the teachers who guided you, the family that supported you, the society that built the systems you live in, the strangers whose unseen labor allowed you the time and resources to pursue your path. Likewise, when failure arrives, you may blame yourself completely, ignoring the countless conditions beyond your reach. Dependent origination shows the arrogance of both pride and self-blame. Neither success nor failure belongs fully to you. They are co-creations of the vast network of causes. This understanding brings deep humility. You are part of the web, not its master. Your choices matter, your actions have weight, but they are threads woven into a fabric much larger than you. Humility here is not weakness, but clarity. It frees you from carrying the impossible burden of total control. You learn to act with integrity, knowing that the outcome is shared with the universe. This allows you to give your best without the crushing pressure to guarantee results. Dependent origination also reveals the interdependence of suffering. When anger arises in someone toward you, it is not born in that moment alone. It carries roots from their childhood, from their stresses, from the culture that shaped them, from the endless chain of conditions feeding their state of mind. Seeing this, you can respond with compassion instead of only personal hurt. Their anger is not simply theirs. It is the fruit of 1,000 unseen seeds. Compassion arises because you know they are caught in the same web of causes as you. This perspective transforms how you hold your own pain as well. Instead of seeing suffering as proof of personal failure, you see it as the natural result of conditions. Depression, anxiety, grief, they are not signs that you are broken, but signs that countless conditions have converged in this moment. This view does not erase responsibility, but it removes shame. You can take steps to create new conditions without believing that your worth is defined by the present ones. Understanding dependent origination turns self-condemnation into patience. One of the most liberating aspects of this teaching is that it dissolves isolation. The illusion of control makes you feel alone, carrying your fate on your shoulders. Dependent origination reminds you that you are never separate. You breathe air given by trees. You eat food cultivated by others. You think thoughts shaped by centuries of culture. You are woven into everything. This dissolves loneliness because it shows that connection is not optional. It is the very nature of existence. The illusion of control also drives much of human conflict. Nations fight believing they can dominate the course of history, ignoring the complex tangle of economic, cultural, and ecological conditions that shape events. Individuals argue, each convinced they alone direct the truth, forgetting that even their opinions are the result of influences beyond their choosing. When dependent origination is understood, arrogance softens. You no longer cling to the belief that your view is absolute. This creates space for dialogue, for empathy, for peace. In daily life, this teaching can be felt in the smallest details. A smile you give a stranger may ease their sorrow, shaping how they treat the next person, which ripples outward beyond your sight. You may think it was a simple choice, but it was the meeting point of countless conditions. You had enough rest to be kind. They crossed your path at that exact moment. The weather did not weigh you down. Everything comes together in subtle ways. To live with awareness of this is to live with reverence, knowing that no act is isolated. Meditation deepens this insight by showing how even the sense of self is dependently originated. The thought, I am, is not a solid truth but a chain of sensations, memories, cultural conditioning, and habits arising together. When the mind quiets, you see the self as a process, not a possession. This recognition dissolves the illusion of a controller behind the scenes. Life flows without needing an owner. Breathing happens, thoughts happen, awareness happens all dependently, all without a fixed self pulling the strings. Trusting dependent origination frees you from endless striving. You no longer waste energy trying to hold together what cannot be controlled. Instead, you focus on planting wholesome conditions, kindness, honesty, mindfulness, compassion. You water the seeds that you can, knowing that the harvest depends on countless other factors. This creates peace, because your role becomes clear. Contribute wisely, but release the demand to control the whole field. This way of seeing also reshapes how you relate to time. The illusion of control makes you obsessed with predicting and forcing the future. Dependent origination shows that the future is the result of innumerable causes, most of which are invisible to you. This does not mean you sit idle. It means you act in the present with clarity, trusting that the web will weave itself in ways you cannot foresee. The future ceases to be a cage of fear, because you no longer demand certainty from it. There is beauty in recognizing the fragility of control. It opens gratitude. When something good unfolds, you see the miracle of conditions aligning. A meal on your table is not simply the result of your effort. It is the sun, the rain, the soil, the farmer, the cook, the countless hands that touched it before it reached you. To eat with this awareness is to eat with reverence. Gratitude becomes natural when you see the web behind each moment. This teaching also nurtures forgiveness. When others harm you, dependent origination reveals the complexity behind their actions. They too are shaped by suffering, by ignorance, by chains of causes beyond their choosing. This does not excuse harm, but it helps dissolve the illusion that they acted from pure malice or absolute control. Forgiveness becomes possible because you see them not as monsters, but as beings caught in conditions, just as you are. Dependent origination is a call to humility, compassion, and trust. Humility, because you recognize that you do not control the universe. Compassion, because you see that everyone is entangled in conditions beyond their will. Trust, because you learn to act wisely and let go of the rest. This triad replaces the burden of control with the lightness of participation. You are not the owner of reality, but you are a contributor to its unfolding. When this insight deepens, the illusion of control becomes almost laughable. You see how often the mind insists, "I did this, I made this happen," while ignoring the infinite conditions that made it possible. You see how often you blame yourself for things you could never have controlled. The grip loosens, and with it, suffering loosens. What remains is a simple clarity. Life is a web, you are a thread, and your freedom is not in controlling the web, but in weaving your part with wisdom and love. In this way, dependent origination dissolves the myth of isolation and control, opening the way to a deeper trust in life. Every event, every thought, every breath is part of an immeasurable tapestry. To live in awareness of this is to live in harmony with reality, no longer enslaved by the exhausting demand to control what was never yours to command. When the truth of dependent origination becomes clear, another illusion begins to lose its grip. If everything arises from countless causes and nothing stands alone, then the self you cling to as solid and unchanging cannot be what it seems. The identity you defend, the roles you claim, the story you repeat about who you are, all of these are shifting, fragile, and dependent too. Yet most suffering comes from trying to freeze this ever-changing process into a fixed self. To let go of this rigid identity is not to lose yourself, but to discover a freedom that carries you with the flow of life instead of against it. The belief in a fixed self is deeply ingrained. From childhood you are taught to define yourself, your name, your achievements, your personality, your opinions. Society reinforces this with endless labels: successful or unsuccessful, strong or weak, worthy or unworthy. You begin to think of yourself as a permanent thing, a separate entity that must be protected at all costs. But the reality is that the self you defend so fiercely shifts every moment. Who you were yesterday is not who you are today, and who you are today is not who you will be tomorrow. The rigidity of identity creates endless tension. You feel pressure to live up to your own labels, to maintain consistency even when your inner truth is changing. You cling to old roles long after they have served their purpose. You defend outdated stories even when they bring you pain. This struggle comes from mistaking a flowing river for a frozen statue. Life is motion, but the fixed self tries to stop that motion, and in the attempt, suffering grows. When you release the belief in a fixed self, you allow life to breathe through you. You no longer demand that you remain the same, and so you are free to evolve. Identity becomes a tool rather than a prison. You can step into roles when they serve compassion, and you can step out when they no longer fit. This flexibility is not weakness, it is wisdom. Just as a tree bends with the wind and does not break, you learn to move with the current of existence without clinging to one rigid form. This release also brings deep compassion for yourself. The rigid self is harsh, demanding perfection, condemning every mistake as permanent failure. But when you see the self as fluid, mistakes become moments, not definitions. You can grow, learn, and transform without carrying the weight of permanent judgment. This gentle view allows healing, because you stop stabbing yourself with the illusion of permanence. You begin to treat yourself as a living process, capable of renewal at every breath. Letting go of fixed identity also transforms relationships. Much of conflict comes from locking others into rigid roles, believing they will always be the way they once were, or expecting them to never change. This prevents true connection, but when you see that everyone is fluid, that each person is a changing process like you allow them the freedom to grow. Love deepens because it no longer depends on clinging to an old version of someone. Trust grows because it rests not on permanence, but on openness to change. Even your relationship with the past softens. Rigid identity ties you to old wounds and old glories, insisting they define you. But when you let go, the past becomes part of your flow rather than a prison. Painful experiences shape you, but they do not fix you. Triumphs enrich you, but they do not freeze you. You are not a sum of events carved in stone. You are the living movement that carries those experiences forward, transforming them into wisdom. The fear of letting go often comes from thinking that without a fixed self you will be lost. But the truth is the opposite. The more you release, the more you discover a deeper ground of being that is not bound by labels or roles. This ground is awareness itself, the open space in which all experiences rise and pass. Awareness does not need to cling to any particular identity to exist. It flows with whatever arises, steady and unshaken. To rest in this awareness is to trust the flow of life at its core. In practical life, letting go of fixed self allows resilience. When circumstances shift, the rigid self breaks, unable to adapt. But the fluid self flows, meeting change with flexibility. Job loss, illness, aging, loss of status, all of these crush the one who believes they must always remain the same. But for the one who has let go of fixed identity, these changes are simply part of the river. Pain may still come, but it does not destroy. There is strength in being able to say, I can change too. This release also opens creativity. The fixed self clings to what is known, afraid of appearing foolish, desperate to preserve a stable image. The fluid self experiments, explores, and plays, unafraid of mistakes because mistakes do not define it. Creativity flourishes in freedom, and freedom grows when you stop protecting a rigid identity. Every new possibility in life requires letting go of the old self that resists it. Trusting flow means trusting that you can step into new forms without losing what matters most. Meditation reveals this truth directly. When you watch the mind carefully, you see that the sense of self is built moment by moment, thoughts about the past, feelings in the body, images of who you are. None of these last, yet together they create the illusion of a solid me. In the stillness of meditation, you see that this me is not fixed at all. It is a story arising and dissolving. Each time you notice this, the grip loosens, and trust in the flow of awareness deepens. Letting go of fixed self also changes how you hold death. If you believe the self is a solid thing, death feels like a terrifying annihilation. But when you see the self as a flow of causes and conditions, death is simply another transformation. Just as each day you shed identities and take on new ones, death is the shedding of one form so that the flow of life continues in other ways. Fear softens when you realize you were never a fixed entity to begin with. The release of rigid identity is not an abandonment of responsibility. It is a wiser way of living. You still act, you still care, you still cultivate values, but you hold them lightly, knowing they too may evolve. Integrity grows not from clinging to a permanent self-image, but from responding truthfully to each moment. You live authentically, not by defending who you think you are, but by allowing who you are to unfold naturally. This unfolding also nurtures deeper trust in the universe. When you stop fighting to maintain a fixed self, you allow life to carry you. The river moves, and you move with it, not as a rigid rock but as part of the current. Trusting flow means resting in the knowledge that change will always carry you somewhere new, and that awareness will always be present to meet it. This trust brings peace, because you no longer live in fear of losing yourself. You were never fixed to begin with. To live this way is to live lightly. Labels lose their weight, failures lose their sting, and successes lose their chains. You become more playful, more compassionate, more present, because you are no longer burdened with defending an identity. Each day becomes an opportunity to meet life freshly, without the prison of who you think you must be. This freedom is not abstract. It touches every breath, every relationship, every step. Letting go of fixed self does not erase you. It reveals you. It uncovers the spaciousness beneath the story, the openness that has always been here. To trust this flow is to find confidence not in permanence, but in movement, not in control, but in release. And in this release, life carries you more gently, guiding you not through force, but through the quiet wisdom of change. When the grip of a fixed self loosens and you begin to flow with change, the question of achievement naturally comes forward. For so long, achievement was tied to identity, proving worth, securing status, building permanence. But once you see that the self is fluid, the old drive to prove yourself through endless striving begins to feel hollow. A new way of living becomes possible, one where achievement is no longer chased like a prize, but arises naturally from presence. This is the paradox of non-striving. The less you cling to achievement, the more deeply your life becomes fulfilled. Striving is fueled by the belief that happiness lives somewhere ahead, at the end of a completed task, a reached milestone, or a won prize. You run toward it with urgency, sacrificing the present moment in the hope that one day you will finally arrive. Yet the pattern always repeats. When the goal is reached, satisfaction fades, and a new chase begins. This cycle of striving is exhausting because it places your peace outside of yourself, forever in the distance. Non-striving cuts through this cycle by teaching you to let go of the idea that fulfillment must be earned through endless struggle. Non-striving does not mean idleness or apathy. It is not sitting back and refusing to engage with life. It means working, creating, and contributing without the constant pressure of proving or securing your worth. When effort is freed from the burden of grasping, it becomes lighter, more joyful, and paradoxically more effective. Actions flow from clarity and presence rather than desperation. In this way, true achievement arises not because you force it, but because you are fully aligned with what you do. Think of the difference between someone playing music out of love and someone playing only to win applause. The first loses themselves in the sound, becoming one with the flow of notes. The second is trapped in self-consciousness, measuring, comparing, and clinging. Both may produce sound, but only the first experiences true achievement, where the act itself is complete in the moment. This is the essence of non-striving, doing for the sake of doing, letting the act be the reward. When you let go of striving, you also release the anxiety that comes with constant comparison. Striving thrives on measuring yourself against others: who is ahead, who is behind, who is better, who is worse. This breeds envy, insecurity, and endless dissatisfaction. Non-striving frees you from this treadmill. You are no longer running against anyone else. You are simply walking your path, with each step whole in itself. Paradoxically, this often allows you to go further, because your energy is no longer drained by fear and competition. Non-striving also brings clarity to ambition. Goals can still exist, but they no longer carry the weight of your self-worth. You can pursue them with energy, but you do not collapse if they are not reached. The process becomes as meaningful as the result, and so every moment is infused with value. This transforms ambition from a desperate chase into a path of learning and growth. Success becomes a byproduct of engagement, not the sole measure of your life. There is great freedom in learning to act without demanding outcomes. You do what is skillful, what is compassionate, what is aligned with truth, and then you let go. If recognition comes, it comes. If results arrive, they arrive. If failure meets you, it is simply part of the unfolding. This way of living strips away the tension that striving creates and leaves only the quiet dignity of presence. Strangely, it is often when you stop clutching at success that success begins to appear, because your actions are no longer clouded by fear or greed. Non-striving also opens the door to deeper creativity. The mind that strives is rigid, clinging to plans, terrified of mistakes. But creativity blossoms in openness, in the willingness to explore without guarantee. When you stop demanding perfection, new ideas arise more freely. You can take risks, experiment, and grow because your worth is no longer tied to flawless outcomes. Many of the greatest discoveries and works of art have emerged not from forced striving, but from playful exploration, from a willingness to be fully present with the process rather than obsessed with the reward. This teaching also transforms your relationship with time. Striving fills your days with urgency, as though life is a race against the clock. Non-striving slows you down. It teaches you that each moment is already complete, that nothing is missing from now. When you live this way, time expands. You begin to notice details you once overlooked: the sound of birds, the rhythm of your breath, the warmth of sunlight. Life stops being a corridor to some imagined future and becomes a field of richness in every step. Meditation offers the clearest training in non-striving. Many beginners approach meditation with the same mindset they bring to work or study, straining for silence, forcing concentration, chasing peace. Yet the more you strive, the more restless the mind becomes. The breakthrough comes when you stop demanding results. You sit, breathe, and allow whatever arises to arise. In that release, calm and clarity often appear naturally. This is the paradox: when you stop trying to make the mind quiet, quietness finds you. Non-striving also reshapes how you face obstacles. Striving resists them, fights them, demands they vanish. Non-striving meets them with curiosity and openness. Obstacles become part of the path, not blocks to it. You engage them without panic, and often you discover they are not as solid as they seemed. By not clinging to the idea that life must be smooth, you discover resilience. Achievement then includes not just reaching goals, but living fully through difficulties. In relationships, non-striving creates intimacy. Striving in love is trying to mold the other person, trying to secure promises, trying to control how affection should look. Non-striving allows love to breathe. You show up with presence, not with grasping. You listen without needing to win. You give without calculating return. This makes love purer, because it is not weighed down by hidden demands. The connection itself becomes the achievement. Letting go of striving also deepens compassion for yourself. When you are no longer driven by the harsh voice demanding constant achievement, you can rest. You can allow yourself to simply be, without needing to earn the right to exist. This rest is not laziness, it is nourishment. From it, true energy arises. You begin to act not out of fear of inadequacy, but out of joy in living. This shift turns even ordinary acts, washing dishes, walking down the street, speaking to a friend, into expressions of fulfillment. The paradox of non-striving is that it often leads to greater achievement in the conventional sense. Freed from the tension of grasping, your energy is steady. Freed from the weight of ego, your vision is clear. Freed from the obsession with results, your work is lighter and more creative. People who live this way often accomplish much, not because they cling to achievement, but because they are deeply aligned with what they do. Yet even if the outer results are modest, the inner achievement is profound, the achievement of peace, authenticity, and joy. To live this teaching is to trust that you are already enough. You do not need to prove your worth through endless striving. You can act with clarity, love, and skill, and let the rest unfold. Achievement is no longer something far ahead, always out of reach. It is here, in the presence you bring to this moment. Non-striving is not the end of effort, but the transformation of effort into something wise, compassionate, and free. When you stop chasing, life begins to meet you where you are. Each step becomes both the path and the destination. Each act, no matter how small, carries its own fulfillment. This is the true achievement, living so fully that nothing needs to be clung to, because everything is already whole. When the restless chase for achievement softens through non-striving, something tender begins to emerge in its place. You realize that the deepest release does not come from abandoning effort altogether, but from allowing your actions to be guided by something greater than personal gain. That something is compassion. To surrender through compassion is not weakness, it is the strength to let go of control out of care for yourself and others. It is the recognition that love carries more power than fear, and that letting go for the sake of well-being is not a loss but the highest form of courage. Control is often disguised as protection. You grip tightly to plans, people, and identities because you believe that holding on will keep everyone safe. But in truth, control is usually driven by fear and insecurity. Compassion changes the reason for release. You stop clinging not because you are defeated, but because you care too deeply to cause more suffering for yourself and for those around you. This surrender is an act of love. Consider how compassion transforms the way you treat yourself. Without compassion, surrender feels like giving up, a failure to endure, a sign of weakness. With compassion, surrender becomes an act of kindness. It is allowing yourself to rest when exhaustion takes over. It is forgiving yourself when mistakes weigh heavily. It is letting go of impossible standards that keep you in chains. To live with compassion for yourself is to realize that control is not always noble. Sometimes the most noble act is to step back and soften. Compassion also shifts the way you hold others. When you try to control people, even with good intentions, you limit their freedom. You demand they live according to your expectations, and in doing so, you take away their chance to learn, stumble, and grow. Surrender through compassion means giving others the space to be themselves, even if it means they choose paths different from what you wanted. This release is not neglect. It is trust in their own unfolding. It is saying, I care enough for you to let you walk your way. This approach dissolves much of the conflict that dominates relationships. Arguments often arise from the need to control, insisting that others think, act, or feel as you do. Compassionate surrender loosens this grip. You learn to listen without forcing agreement, to support without demanding compliance. Peace arises not from winning battles of control, but from letting go of the need to win at all. In this way, compassion creates harmony, where control only creates resistance. On a broader scale, surrender through compassion is how you respond to the suffering of the world. You cannot control wars, disasters, or the pain of every being, but you can choose how you meet them. You can soften into compassion rather than harden into despair. You can let go of the illusion that you must fix everything alone and instead contribute what you can with care. This surrender allows you to act without being paralyzed by the weight of the world. You do what is possible and release what is not. There is profound strength in choosing surrender, not because you are powerless, but because you are moved by love. A parent who loosens their grip so a child can find independence, a friend who releases expectations so the other can breathe, a leader who steps back to listen instead of forcing control. These are acts of courage, not weakness. They show that true power lies in creating space for growth, not in clinging to domination. Compassionate surrender also heals the wounds of self-judgment. Control thrives on harshness, telling yourself you must be better, faster, stronger, perfect. This creates inner conflict and endless striving. When compassion guides you, you release that need for domination over yourself. You allow your humanity to exist without condemnation. This surrender does not mean apathy, it means growth without cruelty. It is giving yourself permission to be imperfect while still walking the path with sincerity. Meditation reveals this quality clearly. You may begin by trying to control the mind, forcing thoughts away, demanding silence. But this only creates tension. When compassion enters, you surrender control. You allow thoughts to come and go without judgment. You hold yourself gently when restlessness arises. This compassionate surrender brings the mind to quietness more effectively than force ever could. The very act of letting go, guided by care, becomes the key to peace. In daily life, this kind of surrender can be practiced in small, steady ways. When plans fall apart, instead of clinging in anger, you release with kindness, acknowledging the disappointment while choosing not to add more suffering. When someone disagrees with you, instead of forcing them to see your side, you surrender the need to be right and listen with openness. Each act of compassionate surrender lightens the weight of control and deepens your connection to the world around you. This teaching also reshapes how you understand strength. Culture often praises control, dominance, and unyielding will, but Buddhism points to a different kind of strength, the strength to yield, to let go, to soften. A river cuts through mountains, not by force, but by steady flow. Compassionate surrender has this same quality. It wears away the sharp edges of suffering, creating space for gentleness and healing. Strength is not in clinging, but in caring enough to release. Even in the face of suffering, surrender through compassion gives you resilience. When hardship strikes, the instinct is to fight, resist, and control every detail. But this often deepens the pain. Compassion teaches you to surrender into care for yourself by allowing rest, for others by offering presence rather than solutions. In this surrender, you find you can endure more, not less, because you are not exhausting yourself in futile battles against what cannot be controlled. Compassionate surrender also changes how you meet death. The final letting go is often feared as the greatest defeat, but when viewed through compassion, death is not a failure of control, it is the last act of release, the return to flow. To approach death with compassion for yourself is to soften into acceptance, to allow the body and mind to complete their cycle with dignity. To meet the death of others with compassion is to release clinging, allowing grief to move while holding them in love without needing to keep them. This way of living does not make you passive. On the contrary, it gives your actions greater meaning. When you act not from the hunger to control but from compassion, your choices are cleaner, freer, and more impactful. You give not to prove, but to serve. You work not to dominate, but to contribute. You love not to possess, but to nurture. Every act becomes lighter, yet more powerful because it is rooted in care rather than fear. To surrender through compassion is to live with open hands instead of clenched fists. It is to release the constant battle for control and replace it with the steady presence of care. This surrender does not shrink you, it expands you. It allows you to hold yourself and others in kindness, to let life move without the chains of fear. In this way, surrender becomes not the end of strength, but its highest expression. When surrender through compassion becomes your way of moving in the world, another subtle shift begins to appear. You start to notice how even acts of kindness, even moments of generosity, can still carry a hidden hunger, the need to be seen, to be thanked, to be validated. This craving for recognition can quietly turn pure giving into another form of control. The path of the Bodhisattva points beyond this. It teaches a deeper trust, to act from love without needing applause, to serve without craving acknowledgement, to let generosity be complete in itself. This is Bodhisattva trust, the freedom of giving freely with no strings attached. The desire for recognition is deeply human. From childhood you are rewarded for good behavior, praised for achievements, and affirmed for acts of kindness. Over time, the mind begins to link giving with receiving acknowledgement. You help not just to help, but to be seen helping. You share not only to share, but to be admired for your generosity. This does not make you evil, it makes you human. But if left unchecked, it chains even your noblest acts to the restless hunger for validation. The Bodhisattva path breaks these chains. A Bodhisattva acts not to gain something, but to reduce suffering wherever it appears. Recognition may come, or it may not. Gratitude may be expressed, or it may be absent. But the act itself is enough. The motivation is compassion, and compassion does not require applause to be real. This trust is liberating. You give because giving itself is joy, because kindness itself is fulfillment. The cycle ends with the act, not with the approval of others. When you practice in this way, giving becomes lighter. You are no longer weighed down by disappointment when gratitude is not shown, nor inflated by pride when recognition arrives. Both are seen as passing winds, not as the measure of your worth. The joy is already complete in the moment of offering. Whether anyone notices or not, the heart expands. This is the essence of Bodhisattva trust, the courage to act from love and let go of the outcome. This way of living also dissolves resentment. Many people become bitter when their efforts go unnoticed. They give to family, to work, to community, and when thanks is not offered, anger grows. But this shows that the giving was secretly tied to recognition. When you act from Bodhisattva trust, resentment cannot take root. You know the act was worthwhile simply because it alleviated suffering, even if no one spoke a word of thanks. Your joy does not depend on someone else's acknowledgement. This teaching also protects you from the ego's subtle traps. Recognition can be intoxicating. When people praise your kindness, it feels good, but it also feeds attachment to image. You begin to act not from pure intention, but from the desire to maintain your reputation as a generous person. Bodhisattva trust cuts through this trap by reminding you that true generosity is invisible. The greatest acts of kindness often leave no trace, no story, no witness. They are known only to the giver, and perhaps to no one at all. Acting without needing recognition also deepens your resilience. If you depend on applause to sustain your effort, your compassion will falter the moment it is not rewarded. But if you act from the fullness of the heart, you cannot be discouraged by silence. You continue to give because giving is who you are, not because the world claps. This resilience is what allows bodhisattvas to keep serving endlessly, even in the face of ingratitude or indifference. Daily life offers countless chances to practice this. You may hold the door for someone who never says thank you, or spend hours helping a friend who forgets your effort, or work hard at a task no one notices. In these moments, the ego protests. It wants recognition. But if you breathe and release, you begin to feel a deeper joy. You acted out of care. That is already complete. The value of your kindness is not diminished by silence. This teaching also dissolves the illusion of separation. Recognition often comes from the belief that there is a giver and a receiver, a benefactor and a beneficiary. But in truth, every act of giving is mutual. When you give, you also receive the joy of generosity, the softening of ego, the connection of compassion. When you release the need for recognition, you begin to feel this mutuality more clearly. Giving is not one-directional. It is part of the flow of interdependence. Meditation on compassion can deepen this practice. As you breathe, you send well-wishing thoughts to others without them ever knowing. No recognition is possible, yet the heart expands. Over time, you see that this inner generosity is as real as any outer act. It trains you to give without expectation, to love without needing a return. The joy of these meditations is quiet but profound. It shows you that recognition is never the true source of fulfillment. This perspective also transforms leadership and service. Leaders who crave recognition often manipulate, seeking glory for themselves even while pretending to serve. True leadership rooted in bodhisattva trust does not seek personal gain. It focuses on the well-being of others, regardless of credit. Paradoxically, such leaders often inspire the deepest respect, because people sense the purity of their intention. But whether recognition arises or not, their joy is already full in the act of serving. Letting go of the craving for recognition also frees you from fear of judgment. When you give only to be seen, you become anxious about how others perceive you. Every act becomes a performance. But when recognition is irrelevant, fear dissolves. You can act from authenticity without worrying how it appears. This freedom allows deeper and truer kindness because the act is guided by compassion alone. The joy of acting without needing recognition is subtle but steady. It does not flare like pride when praised or collapse like bitterness when ignored. It is like a quiet flame, steady and warm, untouched by the winds of approval or neglect. This flame sustains you through every act of giving. It does not need to be fed by applause because it burns from within. To live this way is to trust deeply in the path itself. You trust that kindness matters even if unseen, that compassion shapes the world even if unacknowledged, that love has value even without validation. This trust is what makes the bodhisattva path unshakable. It allows endless giving, not because it guarantees recognition, but because the giving itself is fulfillment. This trust also nourishes humility. When you stop craving recognition, you stop centering yourself in every act. The focus shifts outward, toward the needs of others, toward the alleviation of suffering. You realize that your role is simply to serve as a channel for compassion, not as the hero of the story. This humility does not erase you, it liberates you. You are no longer burdened with proving yourself. You are free to give fully without hesitation. Acting without needing recognition is not easy. The craving runs deep, and the world constantly encourages it. But each time you release it, each time you let kindness be enough, you taste freedom. Over time, this becomes natural. You no longer calculate returns. You give because it is beautiful to give. You no longer wait for thanks. You are already complete. This is the essence of bodhisattva trust. The confidence that compassion is its own reward, the faith that love needs no witness to be real, the freedom of giving without clinging. When you live this way, you discover that the greatest recognition comes not from others, but from within the quiet joy of knowing your heart has expanded, your life has aligned with compassion, and your presence has lightened the suffering of the world, whether anyone sees it or not. When you begin to act without needing recognition, your heart grows lighter and your steps more natural. Yet a question quietly lingers. How do you live in a world that constantly shifts, where circumstances refuse to stay still, and where even your best intentions may be met with obstacles? The answer is offered not only in scriptures, but in the simple language of nature. The river teaches what words often cannot. It reveals how to live with grace through change, how to move forward without forcing, how to adapt without losing direction. The Dharma of flow is not learned from theories, but from watching the way water carries itself through the world. A river has no arrogance, yet it carves valleys and nourishes fields. It does not cling to shape, yet it finds its way to the ocean. It meets rocks, bends, and dams, but instead of shattering against them, it adjusts, softens, and continues. This is not weakness, It is the deepest kind of strength. To live like a river is to understand that adaptability is not betrayal of yourself, but fidelity to the truth that life is movement. The human mind often rebels against this truth. It wants certainty, fixed ground, and unchanging order. But life offers no such stability. Jobs shift, health changes, relationships evolve, identities dissolve. To resist this is to suffer endlessly. To adopt the way of the river is to discover peace in the midst of motion. Flow does not mean drifting without purpose. It means holding your essence while meeting each condition with flexibility. Just as water remains water no matter its shape, you remain rooted in awareness no matter how life bends you. This practice begins by observing how much of your struggle comes from rigidity. You may insist on one path, one outcome, one way things must unfold. When life pushes differently, tension arises. The more tightly you cling, the more you break. Flow teaches you to loosen, to trust that change itself carries intelligence. A river does not resist the bend in its course, it uses it. In the same way, you can allow unexpected turns to become part of your path rather than obstacles to it. There is humility in this. The river never claims to control the terrain, it simply responds to it. When you let go of the illusion of control and practice responsiveness instead, life becomes less of a battle and more of a dialogue. You listen to circumstances, adjust your steps, and discover that adaptability itself can be graceful. This does not mean passivity, it means skillful alignment. Flow is a discipline of listening and responding, rather than forcing and resisting. The Dharma of flow also reveals how to hold strength and softness together. Water is gentle to the touch, yet it can wear down the hardest stone. Its power is not in brute force, but in persistence and adaptability. In your own life, this means learning to combine resilience with gentleness. You can meet hardship with steady presence instead of rigid control. You can persist without hardening. This balance is what allows you to endure without losing compassion. Living in flow also nurtures patience. A river takes its time to reach the sea. It moves steadily, not hurriedly, yet it never stops. In the same way, you can release the urgency of forcing results. Flow teaches that progress is not always visible moment to moment, but steady presence leads you forward. Patience here is not waiting idly, but continuing without clinging to speed. This patience brings peace, because you no longer measure your life against a clock of achievement. Flow also transforms how you see obstacles. Where striving sees a rock as a barrier, flow sees it as an opportunity to bend, to create a new path. When circumstances do not match your plan, instead of despair, you can ask, "How can I adjust here?" This mindset creates resilience, because no obstacle becomes final. Like water, you discover that every block can be met with creativity. Sometimes you go around, sometimes you soften the obstacle itself, and sometimes you find strength by gathering more energy before moving forward. Each way is part of flow. Relationships, too, are guided by this wisdom. Rigidity in relationships creates conflict, demanding that others never change, insisting they match your exact expectations. Flow allows space. It honors the shifts of others while staying rooted in care. Just as a river nourishes whatever it touches without clinging, you can bring kindness to relationships without trying to freeze them. This creates harmony, because love breathes freely when it is not controlled. The practice of flow also brings ease to your inner life. Emotions rise and fall like currents. Anger, sadness, joy, fear, each moves through you. To resist is to trap them, to dam the river and create stagnation. To flow is to let them come and let them go. You do not deny them, but you do not chain yourself to them. This openness turns emotions into teachers rather than jailers. They show you their message and then pass, leaving space for peace. Flow reshapes ambition as well. Instead of forcing a rigid plan, you act with intention, but stay open to how conditions unfold. You may set a direction, but you release the demand for it to look exactly as imagined. This flexibility allows life to surprise you, to open doors you would never have designed. Many of the most meaningful paths are discovered this way, not by clinging but by flowing with opportunities as they appear. Meditation becomes a training ground for this practice. As you sit, thoughts and sensations rise like ripples. The instinct is to hold or push them away. But when you practice flow, you simply let them move. Attention rests like the riverbed, steady beneath the current. This teaches you directly that peace is not in stopping the flow, but in resting with it. The mind becomes spacious, not because it is empty of movement, but because it no longer clings to the movement. The Dharma of flow also nurtures gratitude. When you release rigidity, you begin to notice the beauty of each moment. Just as a river glitters in sunlight, each small detail of life shines when you meet it without grasping. The taste of food, the sound of laughter, the rhythm of breath all become precious. Gratitude arises naturally when you stop fighting reality and begin flowing with it. In times of loss, this teaching is especially powerful. Loss is the place where control is most obviously shattered. The instinct is to cling, to resist, to break against grief. Flow teaches another way. You allow the current of grief to move through you, trusting that even the heaviest waters eventually carry you forward. You do not deny the pain, but you do not harden against it. Over time, grief softens, reshapes, and carries you to new landscapes of compassion. To live with the Dharma of flow is to embody trust, not blind trust, but trust in the very nature of life as movement. You do not need to know each turn of the river to know it will keep flowing. You do not need to control every condition to know you can respond to them. Trust grows not from certainty, but from the steady experience that life, like water, carries you forward if you allow it. In this way, the river becomes more than a metaphor. It becomes a teacher you carry with you. Each time you feel rigid, you remember its softness. Each time you feel blocked, you remember its adaptability. Each time you feel anxious about the future, you remember its patience. To adopt the Dharma of flow is to let nature itself guide your practice, showing you that freedom is not found in stillness alone, but in graceful movement through the ever-changing stream of existence. When the lesson of the river takes root, you begin to notice that flow is not only about movement, but also about stillness. Water rests in calm pools as much as it rushes through rapids. In the same way, the path of trust is not only in adapting to change, but in allowing space, pauses, and silence to teach what words and answers cannot. The human mind is addicted to filling gaps, to demanding explanations, to seeking solutions for every uncertainty. Yet some of the deepest wisdom arrives not in the noise of answers, but in the quietness that holds them. Trusting silence more than answers opens a door into a kind of knowing that cannot be forced, a wisdom that blooms only when you stop searching for it. The urge to always seek answers often comes from fear. Not knowing feels dangerous, as if silence is a void threatening to swallow you. So you grasp at conclusions, repeat familiar stories, or seek reassurance from others. Yet answers are often temporary comforts, fragile shields against the vastness of uncertainty. Silence, by contrast, does not pretend. It allows the unknown to remain unknown, and in doing so, it teaches you to rest in it without fear. This resting is not ignorance, it is courage. It is learning to meet reality without rushing to label it. Silence also teaches presence. In conversation, most people listen only to respond, filling the space with their own thoughts. But when you allow silence, you begin to truly hear not just the words but the feelings beneath them, the pauses where meaning lingers. In these spaces, understanding deepens. Wisdom is not always in what is said, but in what is held between the words. To trust silence is to value this depth over the surface of explanations. In meditation, this lesson becomes clear. The mind begins by chasing thoughts, analyzing, seeking answers to every question. But as you sit, silence grows. At first it feels empty, maybe even unsettling. Over time, you see it is not emptiness at all, but fullness of awareness, of presence, of being. Insights often arise from this silence, not because you forced them, but because you allowed space for them to appear. The silence itself becomes the teacher, showing that truth cannot be grasped, but only revealed when the mind is still. Trusting silence also reshapes how you approach problems. Striving for immediate solutions often leads to hasty decisions. By resting in silence, you allow conditions to clarify themselves. Answers often arise naturally when you stop forcing them. Like muddy water settling when left undisturbed, the mind clears when it is not stirred by constant searching. This patience allows you to act from clarity rather than panic. In relationships, silence can be as powerful as words. There are times when no explanation can ease another's pain, when no argument can resolve a conflict. Presence without words, a quiet hand held, a calm listening ear, can speak more deeply than speeches. Trusting silence here means believing that connection does not always require explanation. Sometimes the deepest care is simply being with another in their difficulty without trying to fix it. Silence also reveals the richness of the present. When the noise of answers subsides, you begin to notice subtleties once overlooked: the rhythm of breath, the rustle of leaves, the stillness of a room. These details are not trivial. They are the texture of life itself. In silence, the ordinary becomes luminous. Wisdom here is not about solving but about seeing, not about explaining but about experiencing fully. The practice of trusting silence also dissolves the ego's constant need for validation. The urge to always have answers, to appear knowledgeable, is often the ego defending its image. Silence humbles you. It shows that not knowing is not weakness, but truth, because reality is infinite and your mind is finite. Accepting this brings peace. You no longer need to pretend mastery over everything. You can rest in humility, allowing the vastness of life to remain mysterious. This humility is also the ground of compassion. When you stop filling silence with your own certainty, you create space for others. You become more patient, more willing to hear perspectives, more open to difference. Silence teaches you to hold others without imposing your answers upon them. In this way, it becomes an act of kindness, a way of saying, "I do not need to control you with explanations. I honor you enough to let the space speak." Trusting silence more than answers also changes your relationship with fear of the future. The mind craves certainty about what is to come, filling the silence of the unknown with plans and projections. But the future cannot be fully known. By resting in the silence of uncertainty, you discover courage. The unknown is no longer a threat, but a field of possibility. Answers may come later, but the silence itself holds you now. Even in the face of death, silence offers teaching. No answer can fully resolve the mystery of what comes after life. Philosophies, beliefs, and doctrines attempt to fill the gap, but the gap remains. Trusting silence here is perhaps the most profound act of faith, not in specific answers, but in the openness of existence itself. This trust allows you to meet mortality, not with denial or false certainty, but with presence and dignity. To practice trusting silence is not to reject knowledge or abandon learning. It is to recognize that answers are limited and that wisdom is larger than explanations. It is to give equal reverence to the space between thoughts, to the pauses in conversation, to the quietness of the heart. Silence does not compete with answers. It completes them, reminding you that truth is often beyond what words can hold. The more you live this way, the more natural it becomes to pause, to breathe, to listen. You stop rushing to resolve every discomfort and instead allow space to teach you. The silence itself becomes a companion, one that guides you gently into deeper trust. And in that trust, life feels less like a puzzle to be solved and more like a mystery to be lived. When silence begins to reveal its wisdom, another truth becomes clear. The restless urge to fill the quiet with answers comes not only from fear of the unknown, but from the ego's insistence on control. The ego cannot rest in uncertainty, because uncertainty threatens its illusion of solidity. It wants to be right, to be secure, to be the center around which life revolves. This grip on certainty is one of the deepest traps, and it is rooted in the false idea of a separate self. To see how the ego clings is to see why suffering endures, and to loosen that grip is to take a step toward real freedom. The ego's hunger for certainty begins early. You learn to define yourself with labels, roles, and achievements, and soon the mind begins to equate identity with control. If you can predict, manage, and dominate circumstances, then the fragile image of self feels protected. But this protection is a fragile illusion, constantly under threat from life's unpredictability. Every unexpected change feels like an attack, because the ego depends on stability that reality does not offer. This is why the ego resists silence. Silence leaves space where it cannot assert itself. In silence, the need to know is exposed as a craving, and the lack of control becomes undeniable. The ego rushes to cover this space with explanations, arguments, judgments, and plans. Yet the more it grips, the more fragile it becomes, because control cannot be maintained in a world built on impermanence and interdependence. The illusion of a separate self is what fuels this desperation. You believe you are an isolated unit, cut off from the whole, responsible for defending your existence against the uncertainty of life. From this perspective, control seems necessary. If you are separate, then safety must be created by force. But when you look deeper, you see that this separateness is not real. Every part of you, your body, your thoughts, your feelings, arises from conditions beyond your control. Breath enters from air, food becomes your flesh, language shapes your thoughts. The self you cling to is woven from countless threads you did not create. The more you grasp at certainty, the more anxious you become. The ego convinces you that if only you knew for sure about the future, about others, about yourself, you would be safe. But each answer it creates quickly dissolves. Plans change, people surprise you, even your own feelings shift from moment to moment. The self that craves stability is itself unstable, and so the chase for certainty becomes endless. To see this clearly is to begin loosening the ego's grip. The Buddha taught that clinging is the root of suffering, and nowhere is clinging more obvious than in the ego's obsession with certainty. You cling to beliefs, to opinions, to identities, not because they are ultimate truths, but because they feel solid. When someone challenges them, you feel personally attacked, as though your survival were at stake. This is the ego defending its illusion of permanence. But when you step back, you see that certainty was never real to begin with. What you defended was a story, not the truth. This insight is not meant to strip you of stability, but to give you deeper trust. Real stability does not come from fixed answers or rigid control. It comes from recognizing that you do not need certainty to live fully. When the ego loosens, you begin to see that life carries you whether or not you grasp it. The ground of being is not in control, but in awareness itself, which does not need to know everything to rest in peace. Examining the ego's grip also reveals how much of human conflict comes from this illusion. Wars are fought over ideologies, communities fracture over beliefs, relationships crumble over the need to be right. Beneath all of this is the ego's fear of uncertainty, the refusal to admit not knowing. Each side clings to certainty as though its very existence depended on it. But in truth, existence itself does not need such certainty. Only the ego does. In your own life, you can see this in the small ways control dominates. You cling to routines not just for structure, but for reassurance. You argue with loved ones not because truth is at stake, but because your identity feels threatened by being wrong. You resist change not because it is harmful, but because it dissolves the illusion of control. Each of these is the ego's attempt to protect itself from uncertainty. Meditation provides a clear view of this process. Sit quietly, and the mind rushes with thoughts. What should I do? How will this go? What does this mean? Each thought is the ego trying to create certainty in a world that cannot be pinned down. When you observe without feeding them, you begin to see the futility of this grip. Thoughts arise and pass, yet awareness remains. The self that demands control is revealed as nothing more than passing waves on a deeper sea. Trust grows when you stop believing the ego's lie that safety comes from control. Instead, you begin to see that safety comes from alignment with truth, from openness to change, from the humility to admit not knowing. The less you cling, the more you can respond wisely. Certainty was never necessary for compassion, never necessary for integrity, never necessary for love. These qualities thrive not because of control, but because of freedom. Letting go of the ego's grip does not mean abandoning discernment. It means recognizing the difference between wisdom and clinging. Wisdom sees clearly and responds appropriately, but it does not demand absolute guarantees. Clinging insists on guarantees even when they are impossible. When the ego steps aside, wisdom has room to guide you. You act with clarity, but without the crushing weight of needing certainty. This practice transforms your relationship with fear. Fear often arises from the unknown. What if this happens? What if that doesn't? The ego insists on answers to erase the fear, but fear dissolves not through answers, but through trust. When you see that the separate self is an illusion, you realize there was never anyone who needed to be protected from uncertainty in the first place. Life moves, and you move with it. Fear loses its foundation when the ego loosens its grip. The grip on certainty is perhaps the most subtle chain of all, because it masquerades as strength. To be firm, to be decisive, to be unshakable, these sound noble. But when rooted in ego, they are just another form of fear. Real strength is the courage to admit uncertainty, to live without rigid ground, to let awareness itself be enough. This is not passivity, it is the deepest form of freedom. The more you see the illusion of the separate self, the easier it becomes to release control. You recognize that the self you defended was never solid, and so there is nothing to protect. Without this false burden, life feels lighter. You can meet each moment as it comes, without demanding that it confirm your identity. This openness allows real intimacy with life, because you no longer stand apart from it. The illusion of separation dissolves, and with it, the desperate need for certainty. To live this way is to walk with humility, knowing that answers will always be partial, control will always be limited, and certainty will always be an illusion. But it is also to walk with freedom, because none of these are required for peace. What you once feared as weakness, the admission of not knowing, becomes your greatest strength. The ego's grip weakens, and in its place arises a quiet trust in the unfolding of life itself. When you begin to see how the ego clings to certainty, another hidden attachment comes into view. Beneath the need to control outcomes and protect identity lies a quieter but equally powerful grip: the obsession with time. The mind measures, schedules, anticipates, regrets. It constantly asks, when? When will this change? When will I arrive? When will peace come? This urgency ties you to clocks and calendars, but also to restlessness within. To release the attachment to time is not to deny its practical use, but to stop living as though your freedom depends on the next moment. True peace is discovered when you rest in awareness that is timeless. Time becomes a prison when it is mistaken for the measure of your worth. You look back and feel regret, thinking too much was wasted. You look forward and feel pressure, fearing there is not enough left. You rush to accomplish before it is too late, or you cling to the past because you believe your best days are gone. In each case, the mind is absent from the present, caught in the illusion that happiness lies in some other point along the timeline. The grip of when creates constant dissatisfaction. Non-attachment to time does not mean abandoning responsibility. It means shifting from being enslaved by time to seeing it as a tool. When you recognize that awareness itself is not bound by past or future, you begin to experience life more directly. Each moment becomes complete, not because it leads to something else, but because it is already whole. The urgency of when begins to dissolve, and with it, the anxiety that time once created. This practice changes your relationship with the past. Memory is not denied, but it is not worshipped either. You can honor experiences, learn from them, and carry their lessons without believing they define you permanently. The pain of mistakes softens because you see they arose under conditions that no longer exist. The glory of past achievements loosens because you know clinging to them prevents fresh growth. Non-attachment allows the past to be acknowledged without being a chain. It also transforms your view of the future. Anticipation often creates as much suffering as the events themselves. The mind races to secure outcomes, to guarantee success, to avoid imagined pain. Yet the future never arrives as you expect. Non-attachment means preparing wisely but without obsession, holding intentions but not imprisoning yourself in them. This does not make you careless, it makes you free. You act now with clarity and trust that what unfolds will be met when it comes, not before. Daily life provides countless examples of this. You may find yourself checking the clock repeatedly as though minutes passing will bring relief. Or you may hurry through meals, conversations, and even moments of rest because the mind is already chasing the next task. These habits are not about efficiency. They are symptoms of attachment to time. Non-attachment is the choice to slow down, to taste food fully, to listen completely, to rest without guilt. In doing so, life regains depth that rushing never provides. Meditation reveals the timeless nature of awareness most clearly. When you sit and observe, thoughts about past and future arise. But as you rest in awareness itself, you see that it is always present, untouched by time. Moments dissolve into a seamless flow, and the pressure of when begins to fade. In this space, peace does not depend on events aligning in the future. It is available now, within the stillness of awareness. This perspective also softens fear of aging. Much suffering arises from counting years, dreading decline, and comparing your present self to younger versions. But when you release attachment to time, you see that life is always unfolding in the present, regardless of age. The body changes, roles shift, but awareness is continuous. What matters is not how many years remain, but how fully this moment is lived. Non-attachment to time also deepens compassion. When you are no longer ruled by urgency, you have space to truly be with others. You listen without rushing to end the conversation. You support without demanding results by a certain deadline. Compassion flourishes when presence replaces urgency. Others feel this, because your care is not measured by the clock, but by the depth of your attention. This teaching, also changes how you see achievement. Striving for milestones often turns life into a race against time. You measure success by how quickly you arrive, by whether you are ahead or behind others. But non-attachment shows that achievement is not defined by speed. Growth has its own rhythm, like fruit ripening in its season. You cannot force it, and you do not need to. True accomplishment is not about reaching by a certain time, but about living with integrity in each step of the path. Letting go of when also reduces anxiety about uncertainty. Much of worry comes from needing to know when something will end or begin. You want to know when the pain will stop, when the solution will appear, when the answer will come. But life rarely gives these guarantees. By resting in timeless awareness, you release this demand. You accept that not knowing when is part of existence, and you trust that the present can be met even without answers. There is beauty in discovering timelessness in simple things. Watching the sky shift colors at dusk, hearing the rhythm of waves, sitting in stillness, these moments remind you that life itself is not bound to schedules. You are part of something vast, beyond clocks and calendars. Non-attachment allows you to taste this vastness without fear. To live this way is not to deny time, but to see through its tyranny. You still plan, you still act, you still meet responsibilities, but you do so without letting time define your worth or dictate your peace. Each breath becomes both path and destination. The question of when loses its power, because the answer is always here. Non-attachment to time is a practice of trust. Trust that the past has given its lessons. Trust that the future will unfold. Trust that the present is enough. In releasing the urgency of when, you discover timeless awareness, the space where peace is always available, where presence is complete, and where freedom is no longer postponed to some later moment. When the weight of time loosens its hold, and you begin to rest in the spaciousness of the present, another door opens before you. To live without being enslaved by when means you no longer hide behind the illusion of certainty or the defense of schedules. What rises to the surface then is something raw and often feared vulnerability. For many, it feels like exposure, like standing unprotected before a storm. But in truth, vulnerability is not weakness. It is the ground where genuine courage grows. To surrender into vulnerability is to meet life openly, without armor, and in that openness lies the deepest strength. Vulnerability is feared because it strips away control. You cannot predict how others will respond when you reveal your pain, your longing, your truth. You cannot guarantee that love will be returned or that kindness will be recognized. The ego, obsessed with certainty, recoils from such risk. Yet when you close yourself off to avoid hurt, you also close yourself off from connection, joy, and growth. The courage of vulnerability is the willingness to remain open even when outcomes cannot be controlled. At its heart, vulnerability is honesty. It is choosing to show up as you are rather than hiding behind masks of perfection. This honesty creates space for genuine connection. People trust you more when they sense your authenticity because it allows them to rest in their own humanity. Walls of defense may prevent rejection, but they also prevent intimacy. When you risk being seen, you give others permission to see themselves more clearly. This courage also reshapes how you meet suffering. Many endure pain in silence, convinced that admitting it shows weakness. But vulnerability transforms suffering into shared humanity. By speaking your truth, you invite others into compassion. The act of revealing difficulty can lighten the burden, not because the pain disappears, but because it no longer isolates you. Vulnerability turns loneliness into connection, teaching that courage is not about carrying everything alone, but about allowing others to walk with you. In relationships, vulnerability is the seed of love. Without it, love becomes performance gestures, roles, and appearances maintained for approval. With it, love becomes real. To say, "I need you," "I was wrong," or "I am afraid," requires courage greater than any external achievement. These words dissolve barriers, opening hearts to each other. Vulnerability makes love deeper because it is no longer built on illusion but on truth. Even in leadership, vulnerability is strength. A leader who pretends to be invincible creates distance. One who admits uncertainty and seeks input builds trust. This kind of courage inspires others, not because of flawless control, but because of authentic humanity. It shows that strength does not mean knowing everything, but being willing to learn, adjust, and grow. Vulnerability in leadership creates resilience in communities because people feel seen, valued, and invited to contribute. Spiritual practice also thrives in vulnerability. To sit in meditation is to face yourself without distraction, without defenses. You see your restlessness, your fears, your longing for control. At first, this exposure feels uncomfortable, but it is the gateway to liberation. Only by allowing yourself to be seen by your own awareness can healing begin. Vulnerability before yourself is as courageous as vulnerability before others, because it dissolves the illusions that keep you from authenticity. Vulnerability is also the gateway to compassion. When you admit your own fragility, you begin to see it in others. Judgment softens because you recognize that everyone carries hidden struggles. The person who lashes out may be shielding pain. The one who seems cold may be terrified of rejection. By owning your vulnerability, you cultivate empathy for theirs. This is not pity but connection, an understanding that courage is shared by all who dare to live with open hearts. To live vulnerably also requires surrendering the need to always appear strong. Strength is often equated with invulnerability, but this is an illusion. True strength is not the absence of pain, but the willingness to face it. It is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act with fear present. The courage of vulnerability lies in saying, "I do not have all the answers. I may be hurt. I may fail, but I will remain open anyway." This openness is where creativity flourishes. To create art, music, or writing is to expose your inner world to others. Without vulnerability, creativity becomes imitation. With it, creativity becomes authentic expression, carrying the power to touch hearts. Vulnerability in creativity is the risk of being misunderstood or rejected, but it is also the path to genuine impact. The works that resonate most deeply are born from the courage to reveal what is fragile, uncertain, and true. In daily life, vulnerability is practiced in small acts, admitting you do not know, asking for help, expressing gratitude, apologizing sincerely. These gestures may feel uncomfortable, but they carry profound strength. Each time you choose vulnerability, you loosen the ego's grip and affirm that openness is not danger but freedom. Over time, these small acts create a life marked by authenticity rather than fear. The courage of vulnerability also reshapes your relationship with failure. The ego fears failure because it exposes imperfection, but vulnerability allows you to face failure without shame. You see it as part of growth rather than proof of inadequacy. This perspective transforms failure into learning, into resilience, into wisdom. Vulnerability frees you from the need to hide your mistakes, allowing you to integrate them into your journey with honesty. Even in the face of death, vulnerability offers dignity. To admit fear, to acknowledge uncertainty, to allow grief, these are not signs of weakness, but of being fully human. Vulnerability at life's end allows connection with others, honesty with oneself, and acceptance of the mystery. It takes courage to face death with openness, but that courage is what transforms fear into peace. The courage of vulnerability is not reckless exposure. It is not pouring out everything to everyone without discernment. It is wise openness, guided by compassion for yourself and others. It means choosing moments of honesty that build connection, deepen understanding, and align you with truth. It requires balance, but the core is always the same: surrendering the illusion of control in order to live authentically. To walk this path is to discover that vulnerability is not the opposite of strength, but its foundation. Strength without vulnerability is brittle. It cracks under pressure. Strength with vulnerability is flexible. It bends, adapts, and endures. When you embrace vulnerability, you discover a courage that no armor can provide: the courage to live openly, to connect deeply, and to surrender to life as its island. When the courage of vulnerability begins to guide your steps, you start to see that openness itself leads you into mysteries the rational mind cannot resolve. To be vulnerable is to admit you do not always know, that life resists being neatly explained, that uncertainty cannot be defeated by logic alone. This realization brings you face to face with paradox, the kind of truth that cannot be solved like a puzzle, but only lived. Zen tradition calls these koans, questions or riddles that break the grip of the intellect and open the heart to something deeper. But koans are not only found in monasteries, they appear every day, woven into the contradictions of ordinary life. Learning to accept paradox without forcing resolution is a profound practice in trust. The mind is conditioned to seek closure. Every question must have an answer, every tension must be resolved, every contradiction must be explained. This drive gives the illusion of control, but it also imprisons you in frustration. Some questions do not have final answers. Some situations hold opposing truths at once. When you try to force clarity, you suffer. Everyday koans teach that peace is not in resolving the paradox, but in learning to rest inside it. One example is love itself. Love is both joy and pain, both freedom and responsibility, both gift and vulnerability. To demand it be only one thing is to distort it. To accept the paradox is to live more fully within it, to allow the contradictions to deepen rather than diminish your experience. Love is a living koan, unsolvable but transformative when embraced. Another everyday koan appears in the balance between effort and surrender. You must act, yet you must also let go. You must prepare, yet you must trust. Both sides seem contradictory, yet together they reveal a truth beyond logic. Life asks for both at once. The mind wants a formula: either control everything or abandon all effort. But the koan teaches that truth is found only in holding both with humility. These everyday paradoxes reveal that the intellect, while useful, is limited. Logic can measure, compare, and analyze, but it cannot touch the depth of lived experience. A koan unsettles the mind precisely to point beyond it. When you are faced with the riddle of how life can be beautiful and tragic at the same time, the mind cannot solve it, but the heart can hold it. This holding is not passive, it is wisdom. Learning to live with paradox also reshapes how you approach suffering. Pain and growth often arrive together. Loss can deepen gratitude, fragility can reveal strength. The mind asks, how can both be true? The koan does not resolve the tension, it invites you to enter it fully. When you stop demanding that suffering make logical sense, you begin to see its teaching more clearly. Life is not about avoiding contradictions, but about walking through them with openness. In meditation, paradox often appears. You are told to rest without striving, yet to remain alert. You are invited to release thought, yet not to push thought away. To the mind, these are contradictions. To awareness, they are invitations to settle into a deeper space where both can coexist. Meditation itself is a living koan, showing you that truth often transcends the categories the mind demands. The practice of koans is not about answers, but about transformation. When you sit with paradox, something softens. The restless drive for resolution quiets, and you discover a new capacity to rest in the unknown without fear. This capacity is trust. It is the recognition that life itself is vast, mysterious, and cannot be reduced to logic. You begin to see that not every question needs solving, not every contradiction needs resolution, not every uncertainty needs closure. Everyday life is filled with such koans if you pay attention. Parenting is one. You guide children, yet you must let them go. Work is another. You give effort, yet outcomes are never fully yours. Even your own mind is a koan. You search for self, yet the more you look, the less solid it becomes. Each of these is unsolvable, yet each points you toward wisdom if you allow it to remain open. This practice also transforms relationships. Many conflicts arise because people insist on resolution: who is right, who is wrong, what is the single truth. But often both sides carry truth, even if contradictory. To hold paradox in relationships is to say, both our experiences matter, even if they do not align neatly. This does not eliminate difficulty, but it allows compassion. You no longer need to force unity by denying complexity. You can love within the paradox rather than against it. Trusting life beyond logic does not mean abandoning reason. It means recognizing its limits and complementing it with openness. Logic builds bridges and cures disease, but it cannot teach you how to love, how to forgive, how to live with mortality. These require the courage to sit with what cannot be solved. Koans remind you that wisdom is not always clarity, but sometimes the strength to hold what is unclear. The courage to accept paradox also softens your relationship with control. The mind wants clean solutions to avoid vulnerability, but when you accept paradox, you no longer need everything to be neat. You allow life to remain messy, contradictory, and alive. In this way, paradox becomes a teacher of humility. It shows that your categories are too small for reality, and that wisdom lies not in shrinking reality to fit them, but in expanding your heart to embrace what they cannot contain. In daily practice, you can begin by noticing where paradox unsettles you. When you feel torn between two truths, resist the urge to dismiss one. Sit with both. Feel the discomfort and allow it to teach you. Over time, you discover that the discomfort itself is part of the path. It stretches your capacity for openness, and in that stretch, trust deepens. Everyday koans are everywhere, waiting not to be solved, but to be lived. They ask you to step beyond the narrow gate of logic into the vastness of being. When you accept them, life itself becomes your teacher. You begin to see that wisdom is not a tidy set of answers, but a willingness to walk into paradox with open hands and an open heart. When the practice of sitting with paradox begins to settle in your heart, you start to notice another place where the mind struggles the most when dealing with the lives of others. Just as the mind wants to solve contradictions, it also wants to shape people, to direct them, to insist that their path should mirror your vision of what is right. This desire often hides behind love, responsibility, or care, but at its core, it is another form of control. The truth is painful and liberating at once. You cannot walk another's path for them, nor can you dictate the lessons they must learn. To relinquish control over others' journeys is one of the deepest practices of trust, and it allows love to breathe without suffocation. The urge to shape another's path often comes from fear. You want those you love to avoid mistakes, to be safe from harm, to find success without struggle. So you advise, correct, and sometimes interfere, believing that your vision is clearer than theirs. But each person carries their own rhythm, their own timing, their own unique lessons. To impose your will is to confuse care with control. True compassion recognizes that growth cannot be forced, it ripens in its own season. Letting go of control does not mean indifference. It means shifting from directing to supporting, from pushing to holding space. You can still offer guidance, but you release the expectation that it must be followed. You can share wisdom, but you trust that each person will integrate it in their own way, or perhaps not at all. This trust honors their autonomy, acknowledging that their path, like yours, is shaped by countless causes and conditions beyond anyone's control. Parents feel this struggle most deeply. The instinct to protect children is natural, but when protection turns into over-control, it stifles growth. A child learns resilience not from being shielded from every fall, but from standing up after falling. To relinquish control here is to allow room for mistakes, knowing that mistakes themselves are teachers. It is the courage to let children live their own lives, even when their choices differ from what you would have chosen. In relationships of love or friendship, the illusion of control often hides as expectation. You want your partner to grow in the way you imagine, to reflect your ideals, to live according to your plans. When they do not, frustration or disappointment arises. But this shows that the love was conditional, dependent on them following your script. To relinquish control is to love without script, to support without chains. This creates a space where love matures into respect, where connection is based on freedom rather than demand. Even in the workplace or community, control over others' paths can appear subtly. You may believe that your way of solving problems is the only correct one, or that others should think and act as you do. This rigidity limits creativity and erases diversity. To let go is to recognize that many paths can lead to wisdom, many approaches can bear fruit. By allowing others to walk differently, you not only honor their uniqueness, but also open yourself to learning from perspectives you would never have discovered alone. The difficulty in letting go lies in the illusion that control equals care. You fear that if you release control, others will suffer. But suffering cannot be eliminated by domination. Even if you could shape every step of someone's path, they would still face change, loss, and impermanence. What liberates is not your control, but their capacity to meet life directly. Relinquishing control allows them to discover this capacity, to find their own strength rather than depend on yours. Meditation on interdependence can help soften this grip. When you observe the flow of causes and conditions, you see that no single person directs another's life. Choices arise from countless influences: family, culture, circumstance, karma. To imagine you alone can control another's journey is to deny this web. With awareness, humility grows. You can contribute support, but you cannot dictate destiny. This humility brings peace, because it frees you from an impossible burden. Letting go of control also prevents resentment. When you insist others must follow your way, you set yourself up for disappointment. When they do not, you feel ignored or unappreciated. This poisons relationships, turning care into conflict. But when you release the expectation of control, you act from generosity rather than demand. Your support is offered freely, without strings attached. Whether or not it is received, your peace remains intact. This practice deepens compassion because it teaches you to see others as capable beings rather than extensions of yourself. You stop viewing their choices as reflections of your worth. Instead, you respect their struggles as their own. You begin to understand that love is not possession but presence, the willingness to walk alongside without steering the direction. This presence is more healing than control could ever be, because it affirms the dignity of the other. Relinquishing control also means releasing the idea that you know best. While you may have more experience in certain areas, you cannot know the totality of another's inner world. Their fears, dreams, and karmic lessons are hidden from you. What may look like a mistake to you could be the doorway to their greatest growth. What may appear as failure could be the soil of resilience. To let go is to accept that you do not see the whole picture, and that their unfolding belongs to them, not to your vision. This does not mean withdrawing from care. On the contrary, it makes your care purer. When you support without controlling, your actions come from love rather than fear. You encourage, guide, and protect when necessary, but you also step back when it is time. This balance allows your relationships to thrive, because those you care for feel both supported and respected. They sense the difference between guidance that empowers and control that confines. The courage to release control over others' paths also liberates you. Trying to shape another's life is exhausting. It ties your peace to their choices, making you anxious whenever they deviate. By letting go, you reclaim your energy. You focus on your own growth, while trusting others to manage theirs. Paradoxically, this often strengthens relationships, because your presence becomes lighter, freer, less demanding. Even death offers this lesson. Watching loved ones suffer or face mortality brings the painful realization that you cannot control their journey. No matter how deeply you wish to take their pain away, you cannot walk that path for them. To let go here is to honor their humanity, to be present with compassion without trying to rewrite their experience. It is perhaps the most profound act of respect, to allow another to meet their own path, even at the end of life. Relinquishing control over others' paths requires humility, patience, and faith. Humility to admit you do not hold the answers for another's life. Patience to allow their growth to unfold in its own time. Faith that the same wisdom guiding your journey also guides theirs. When you live this way, relationships shift from struggle to trust, from demand to freedom, from fear to love. To walk this path is to embody a deeper form of compassion, one that respects freedom, honors difference, and trusts the unfolding of each being's journey. You discover that love does not need control to be strong. On the contrary, it becomes strongest when it allows others to walk their own way, while you walk beside them with open hands and an open heart. When you begin to release the need to shape another's journey, you are left standing face to face with your own. The energy once poured into controlling others flows back toward you, and a deeper truth reveals itself. The universe often shows you not what you want to see, but what you are carrying within. Life reflects your state of mind, your fears, your trust, your openness, your resistance. This is samsara's mirror. To trust the universe, you must also learn to trust yourself, because the two are never separate. The outer world becomes a reflection of your inner stance, and trust becomes reciprocal. The more you allow inner harmony, the more you perceive harmony around you. The idea that the world mirrors your state is not about magical thinking or bending reality to your moods. It is about perception and resonance. When you are anxious, every event seems threatening. When you are calm, those same events seem manageable. The outer conditions may not change, but your inner condition changes how you meet them. In this sense, samsara holds up a mirror. It shows you not only the impermanence of life, but the way your inner lens colors everything you see. Trusting yourself is not about confidence in abilities alone. It is about trusting the deeper ground of awareness, the space within that can hold every experience without being shattered. When you learn to rest in this space, you discover that life's reflections no longer frighten you. Even suffering becomes less overwhelming, because you see it as a message rather than an attack. The world mirrors your growth by shifting how events are felt within you. This teaching changes the way you meet challenges. Instead of asking only, "Why is this happening to me?" you begin to ask, "What in me is being shown here?" This shift does not mean blaming yourself for hardship. It means recognizing that how you relate to hardship is shaped by your inner state. If you meet loss with resistance, the mirror shows turmoil. If you meet it with openness, the mirror shows resilience. The outer event is the same, but the reflection reveals your relationship with it. This mirror also teaches humility. When conflict arises with others, the instinct is to focus on their faults, But if you pause, you may see your own fears reflected. Their anger might reveal your discomfort with anger. Their withdrawal might reflect your fear of abandonment. The mirror is not about fault, but about learning. Samsara reflects what is unfinished within you so that you can meet it, understand it, and release control. Trusting yourself also means trusting that you can face what the mirror shows. Often people resist inner reflection because they fear what they will see: weakness, fear, shame, doubt. But trust reminds you that whatever arises, you are capable of meeting it. Awareness itself is never harmed by what it sees. This realization frees you to face yourself honestly, and in doing so, to face the world with greater clarity. The reciprocity of trust becomes clear in relationships. When you trust yourself, you are less likely to demand constant reassurance from others. You meet them from a place of wholeness rather than need. This trust allows them to feel safe too, because they are not burdened with carrying your insecurity. In turn, they often respond with greater openness. The mirror reflects back the trust you extend inwardly. In meditation, this teaching is direct. Sit quietly, and the mind reflects itself in each thought and feeling. Restlessness, fear, joy, and peace all arise as reflections. You begin to see that awareness itself is steady while the reflections shift. Trust grows as you realize you do not need to control or deny what arises. You simply meet it, and in that meeting, its power softens. Meditation becomes a mirror where you practice trusting both the mind's storms and the awareness that holds them. This perspective transforms your relationship with the universe itself. Instead of viewing it as hostile or indifferent, you begin to see it as a mirror reflecting your own openness. When you carry trust, the world feels supportive. When you carry fear, the world feels threatening. This does not mean external events change instantly, but your way of perceiving them does. And that perception shapes how you respond, which in turn shapes what unfolds. Trust becomes a cycle. Trusting yourself allows you to trust the universe, which strengthens your trust in yourself. This cycle also dissolves the illusion of separation. The ego insists you are here and the universe is out there, that you must control the external to protect the internal. But the mirror shows otherwise. Inner and outer are not two. They reflect and influence each other constantly. When you accept this, the struggle to dominate life softens. You begin to collaborate with existence rather than battle it. The mirror of samsara is not always gentle. Sometimes it confronts you with painful truths, attachments you must release, patterns you must see, illusions you must outgrow. But these reflections are not punishments, they are teachings. The universe reflects what is within so that you have the chance to awaken. Trusting this process means believing that even discomfort has meaning, that even suffering is a teacher pointing you back to yourself. Everyday life offers endless opportunities to practice this. When impatience arises in traffic, the mirror shows your relationship with waiting. When jealousy arises in comparison, the mirror shows your relationship with self-worth. When peace arises in simple moments, the mirror shows your capacity to rest. Each experience becomes a reflection, not a verdict. To trust the mirror is to learn from it without fear. The courage to trust yourself and the universe together is what makes this teaching transformative. Without trust, the mirror feels cruel, as though life were mocking you. With trust, the mirror becomes compassionate, showing you where you are ready to grow. You stop asking life to change before you can feel peace. You begin to change your relationship with life, and peace emerges naturally. To live this way is to embrace responsibility without blame. You are not the sole creator of events, but you are responsible for how you meet them. Samsara mirrors your inner stance, and in that reflection, you are invited to align with trust. Each time you choose trust over fear, openness over rigidity, presence over resistance, the mirror reflects it back in ways large and small. In the end, trusting the universe by trusting yourself is about recognizing the unity of inner and outer, self and world. The boundary dissolves, and what remains is participation in a vast unfolding. You no longer see the universe as an enemy to outwit, but as a mirror guiding you toward your own awakening. And with that trust, you begin to walk more gently, more courageously, more freely, meeting each reflection not with fear but with gratitude. When you begin to see how samsara reflects your inner state, it becomes clear that much of what is mirrored back arises through what you say and what you withhold. Words carry energy, shaping both the world around you and the mind within. Silence too has its power, sometimes as healing presence, sometimes as avoidance, sometimes as wisdom. The challenge is discerning when speech binds you and when silence liberates you. To release control in speech and silence is to walk with a deeper sensitivity, learning that not every truth must be spoken, not every silence must be broken, and that freedom lies in the balance between the two. The urge to control through words is strong. People often speak to prove themselves, to protect their image, to dominate, or to fill the discomfort of emptiness. Words become armor, weapons, or distractions. But when speech arises from fear or ego, it does not create connection, it creates bondage. You become entangled in arguments, misunderstood intentions, and the weight of promises you cannot keep. The more you cling to words as control, the more they control you. Silence, on the other hand, is often feared. It feels like emptiness, like absence, like something is missing. Many rush to fill it with chatter, explanations, or noise. Yet silence can be the most honest communication of all. When you sit in silence with another, there is no mask, no defense, no performance, just presence. This kind of silence frees, because it opens space for truth to emerge without force. To practice releasing control here means becoming intimate with intention. Before speaking, you pause. Is this word meant to heal or to dominate? Is it born of clarity or of fear? Does it serve understanding or simply my ego's need to be heard? In silence, you ask too, am I withholding because wisdom is here or because I fear vulnerability? Am I silent because it is kind or because it is avoidance? This awareness transforms both speech and silence into acts of mindfulness rather than habits of control. There are moments when words are necessary. Silence in the face of injustice becomes complicity. Silence when someone reaches for help becomes neglect. Speech here is not control but compassion. To name truth, to offer comfort, to give guidance, these are forms of speech that free rather than bind. Yet even then, the way words are spoken matters. Harsh truth delivered without care becomes another form of control. Gentle truth, spoken with compassion, becomes a doorway to healing. Likewise, there are moments when silence is the deepest gift. Arguments often escalate because each side insists on the last word. In such moments, silence is not defeat, it is freedom. It releases the need to win and allows space for tempers to cool. In relationships, silence can also be presence more powerful than explanation. Sitting with someone in grief, without rushing to fix or explain, often offers more comfort than any words could. Speech can become bondage when it builds identities that must be defended. You declare, I am this, I believe that, I will always do this, and then feel trapped when life shifts. Silence can become bondage too when it suppresses truth out of fear. When you stay quiet, not out of wisdom, but because you fear rejection. Releasing control means stepping beyond both extremes. Words and silence are tools, not prisons. You learn to use them skillfully rather than be used by them. This balance transforms relationships. Many conflicts are less about the issue itself and more about words said carelessly or silences held too long. When you release control, you stop using words to manipulate or silence to punish. Instead, you speak with honesty when it matters, and you rest in silence when it heals. This creates trust, because others sense that your communication arises not from control but from sincerity. Meditation reveals the nature of speech and silence within the mind itself. Thoughts are like inner words, constantly narrating, explaining, controlling. When you sit and observe, you see how exhausting this chatter island silence beneath it is, not empty but spacious. The more you rest there, the more you recognize that speech, when it arises, can come from this space too, from presence rather than compulsion. This is why meditators often speak less, not because they fear words, but because silence has taught them their true weight. Releasing control in speech and silence also dissolves the ego's grip on being right. Many words are spent defending opinions, forcing agreement, or proving superiority. But what if being right is not the point? What if listening, pausing, or letting go of the last word is the greater strength? This surrender does not weaken your truth. It frees it from ego. Silence here is not absence, but presence strong enough not to need validation. The practice also reshapes how you relate to yourself. The inner critic speaks constantly, controlling through harsh words. Learning silence within allows you to release this bondage. You begin to see that you do not need to believe every inner word. You can rest in the quiet beneath, where awareness does not condemn. This self-silence is not suppression, but freedom from the tyranny of endless judgment. In daily life, releasing control in speech and silence means moving slower with communication. It means not rushing to fill every pause, not rushing to defend every point, not rushing to prove yourself with words. It means trusting silence enough to let it carry meaning when words would only entangle. And it means trusting words enough to let them be spoken when silence would cause harm. This middle path makes communication both lighter and more powerful. Ultimately, the wisdom of speech and silence is about trust. Words cannot secure control over life, and silence cannot protect you from all pain. But both can become expressions of trust when guided by awareness. Speech becomes a way to share truth without demand. Silence becomes a way to rest in presence without fear. Together, they create a rhythm of freedom, sometimes speaking, sometimes silent, always aligned with compassion rather than control. To live this way is to discover that communication is not about domination, but about connection. When you release the need to control through words, and when you allow silence to speak in its own way, you begin to participate in dialogue with life itself. And in that dialogue, you discover that both speech and silence can be doorways to liberation, depending on how you hold them. When you learn to release control in both speech and silence, you begin to notice something deeper. Beneath the words you choose and the pauses you hold is a larger truth. Life itself cannot be scripted. No matter how carefully you plan, the next moment is uncertain. At first, this feels like a burden, something to endure. But if you look closer, uncertainty is not only unavoidable, it is the very fabric that makes life alive. The shift comes when you stop merely tolerating unpredictability and begin to celebrate it, seeing uncertainty not as a threat but as a source of wonder. This is joyful surrender. The mind is trained to seek stability. It wants everything mapped out, answers secured, and outcomes guaranteed. Yet life refuses to obey these demands. Storms appear without warning, plans collapse, opportunities emerge from nowhere. To the controlling mind, this feels like betrayal. But if life were perfectly predictable, it would also be lifeless. The very joy of existence comes from surprise, from freshness, from the unfolding that cannot be fully known in advance. Joyful surrender is the willingness to lean into this unpredictability with trust. It is not resignation, which carries heaviness, but celebration, which carries lightness. You do not give up, you open up. You allow the unexpected to be a gift rather than an enemy. This shift changes everything. What once felt like chaos becomes opportunity. What once felt like danger becomes mystery. This way of living does not deny difficulty. Uncertainty includes pain, loss, and disappointment. But it also includes unexpected kindness, sudden insight, and unimagined joy. To surrender joyfully is to embrace both, to recognize that you cannot have surprise blessings without surprise challenges. They are two sides of the same coin. Life's richness comes from its unpredictability. When you accept this, you no longer endure uncertainty, you delight in it. Trust is the foundation of this surrender. Without trust, uncertainty feels unbearable. With trust, it becomes spacious. You begin to see that while you cannot predict outcomes, you can trust your ability to meet them. You can trust that awareness itself is stable, even when circumstances are not. You can trust that unpredictability is not random cruelty, but the very nature of existence. Trust turns uncertainty from a source of fear into a source of joy. This joy is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet, steady, like laughter bubbling up when you see the beauty of not knowing. You realize that the very things that scared you, the missed turn, the unexpected meeting, the unplanned change, often became the most meaningful parts of your life. This realization softens resistance. You stop fighting unpredictability and begin to see it as an ally. Meditation reveals this joy directly. Each breath is uncertain. Each thought arises unexpectedly. You cannot script the mind's flow, yet in sitting with it, you discover peace. You stop demanding that meditation be predictable and begin to find joy in watching whatever arises. This practice teaches you that uncertainty is not an obstacle but the very field where awareness blossoms. In daily life, joyful surrender shows up in how you approach change. Instead of clinging to old forms, you open to what comes next. Instead of fearing endings, you notice the beginnings they create. You walk with curiosity rather than dread. This curiosity turns uncertainty into exploration. Each moment becomes an invitation to discover rather than a problem to solve. Relationships also transform. Much conflict arises because people demand certainty from one another. Certainty of love, certainty of agreement, certainty of permanence. But love itself is uncertain. Feelings shift, circumstances evolve, people grow. Joyful surrender does not fear this. It celebrates it. Love becomes deeper when it is not chained to guarantees. Each expression of care is precious precisely because it is not guaranteed to last forever. This recognition brings both gratitude and joy. The practice also reshapes ambition. Many set rigid goals, convinced their happiness depends on achieving them exactly as planned. But life often interrupts with unexpected turns. Joyful surrender means holding ambition lightly. You still work, still strive, but you leave room for surprise. Often the path unfolds in ways more creative than anything you imagined. By releasing the demand for certainty, you allow life to exceed your plans. Even suffering is touched by this perspective. When pain comes, the mind demands certainty. When will this end? How will I endure? But the truth is that no state lasts forever. Pain, like joy, is uncertain. Joyful surrender allows you to rest in this truth. You do not need to know when relief will come. You only need to trust that change is constant. This trust softens the weight of suffering and creates space for resilience. To cultivate this joy, you can begin with small acts of openness. When plans shift, instead of reacting with frustration, pause and ask, what possibility hides here? When uncertainty arises, remind yourself, this is the nature of life, not a mistake. Each time you practice this, you build a habit of celebration rather than resistance. Over time, this becomes your natural stance. Joyful surrender is not about pretending everything is easy. It is about seeing that unpredictability is not an interruption of life, but life itself. It is about shifting from fear of the unknown to delight in discovery. This shift does not remove challenges, but it changes how you meet them. Instead of shrinking in dread, you step forward with curiosity. Instead of enduring, you celebrate. To live this way is to feel lighter. The burden of controlling every outcome falls away. The pressure of needing guarantees dissolves. You walk with openness, ready to meet whatever arises. And in this openness, joy appears naturally, not because life is certain, but because it is beautifully uncertain. Letting go was never about giving up. It was about waking up. Through these lessons we've walked together, from the subtle art of non-interference to the freedom of impermanence, from the balance of effort to the patience of karma, from trusting silence to softening the ego, from vulnerability to the playful wisdom of paradox. We saw how clinging to control over others only tightens our own chains, and how samsara itself becomes a mirror, showing us the truth of our inner state. We discovered that words and silence both carry power, that uncertainty can be celebrated instead of endured, and that trust is not blind, it is the deepest alignment with the flow of life itself. The invitation is simple yet profound. Release the grip, trust the unfolding, and let the universe carry you with the same grace it carries rivers, stars, and seasons. Now I'd love to hear from you. What part of this journey spoke to you most? Which lesson are you ready to practice in your own life? Share your reflections in the comments, because your words might be the reminder someone else needs. And if you found value here, don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell so you can keep walking this path with us. More wisdom, more peace, more freedom is waiting. Let's continue to grow together.